Chapter 896. Eric probably understood something and continued to ask, which record company? Polygram, the record company headquartered in the Netherlands. I remember that it was about 1992. Polygram invested in Working Title and became the largest shareholder of this film company. At that time, one of the founders of Working Title, I think his name was Tim Bevan. He left the company because he was dissatisfied with the other partners' deal. Polygram then found Eric Feiner to be the president until now. After Barbara Broccoli finished talking about some of the information she knew, she asked curiously, "Eric, why are you asking about this?" Eric was a little surprised. Although Firefly Electronics had launched the Fireflyer player and had been in contact with major record companies for online music sales, Eric actually did not pay much attention to the movements of the major record companies. He originally thought that Polygram had been acquired by other major record giants. In his memory, after 2000, he rarely heard the name Polygram. From what Barbara Broccoli said, it was clear that this had not happened yet. Sorting out the somewhat scattered information in his mind, Eric said, "Just now, before you came over to say hello, Eric Feiner should have hinted to me that Polygram might be for sale." "I haven't heard of this yet." Barbara Broccoli shook her head and said, "However, this should be a good opportunity. Drew gave me a Fireflyer player a few days ago. I also think it's very good. It's just that there are too few songs in the music store. If you want to listen to a song, you have to buy a CD to copy it first. It's very troublesome. If you have Polygram, the content of songs in your online music store will definitely increase by a lot." Eric nodded and smiled, but he understood more in his heart. Since Barbara Broccoli could see the shortcomings of Yahoo Music Store in terms of content, Polygram would definitely notice this more easily. Although he was not clear about the current situation of Polygram, this was obviously the reason for Eric Feiner's words just now. In fact, Eric had always hoped that through the large-scale promotion of MP3 music players, he could force the major record companies to take the initiative to seek cooperation with online music stores. However, the lack of content in the Yahoo Music Store was indeed a headache. After all, even if they didn't care about the survival of the entire recording industry, if users couldn't buy authentic music through the internet and were forced to turn to pirated music, MP3 players would definitely be under more and more pressure. After making up their minds to collect some information on the Polaroid, Eric and Barbara Broccoli chatted about other topics. However, before the song ended, Eric saw his assistant, Peter Ritchie, gesturing at him with a phone in his hand. Eric raised his chin towards Peter Ritchie and said, "Sorry, Barbara, Peter might have something urgent to talk to me about." "Of course it's fine." Barbara Broccoli smiled and shook her head. She released Eric and they left the dance floor together. Peter Ritchie waited for Eric to approach before he handed the phone over and said, "Boss, it's a call from San Francisco. It's from Mr. Mike Nelly. You must answer it personally." Eric nodded, smiled at Barbara Broccoli again, took the phone, put it to his ear, and walked toward the banquet hall door. Although the call was from Victor Mike Nelly, the CEO of Firefly Electronics, it was related to Amazon. It was almost 10 o'clock in the evening in London, but it was still afternoon in the western United States. It started with the pre-sale of Amazon's Fireflyer player in the morning. At 10 o'clock in the morning in the western United States, Amazon officially opened the pre-sale of the Fireflyer player to users. Unexpectedly, in just 52 minutes, the sales broke through the 50,000 unit mark. This data far exceeded Amazon's expectations. Jeff Bezos, who felt that there was a problem, decisively suspended the pre-sale. After some investigation, it turned out that the Fireflyer players in physical stores were generally $30 higher than the Amazon platform, and the price of the Fireflyer player on Amazon was still $299 after it was released for pre-sale. Therefore, many users who were obviously electronic retailers treated Amazon as the wholesale platform for the Fireflyer player. Some users were even crazy enough to order 1,000 units at once, and orders for 50 units or even 100 units were innumerable. The final statistics showed that out of the 50,000 units of pre-sale sales, there were less than 7,000 orders from ordinary customers. The rest were all large orders. In fact, before Amazon opened the pre-sale, it was not that they did not consider this problem. During the previous rush period, Amazon stipulated that each user could only buy 2 units at a time. However, Amazon's management generally felt that since Firefly Electronics' production capacity had greatly increased, the market demand for the Firefly player might not be so tight anymore. The physical retail price should gradually be reduced to the price of the online platform. Therefore, they did not limit the number of units that users could buy. The result of this was that after the pre-sale was opened, there were crazy orders. Obviously, the physical retailers had tasted the benefits of the Firefly player during the first few months of sales. Since they could not get enough supplies from Firefly Electronics, they began to look for other ways. It was not hard to imagine that during the rush period that Amazon implemented 3 months ago, there must have been traces of these people. Otherwise, it was unlikely that all 5,000 units of the Firefly player were sold out in less than a minute. After all, if they managed to get a Firefly player, they could earn at least $30 or more. This kind of business was very cost-effective. However, since the mistake had already happened, Amazon had to find a solution. Canceling those large orders was definitely out of the question. Although this group of users did not have a motive, since Amazon did not limit the number of units that they could buy in advance, they were not breaking the rules. Forcing the company's own mistakes onto the users would lead to lawsuits in the United States. It was impossible to win, and it would also damage the company's own reputation. The pre-sale was suspended for an hour. After Amazon added the restriction of 2 units per user, the transaction page was opened again. However, the 50,000 units that had been sold would definitely affect Amazon's continuous supply. Moreover, even if the restrictions were put in place, it was actually very simple to break this restriction. As long as one had enough patience and registered more accounts, it would be fine. The key to solving this matter was ultimately on Firefly Electronics. Therefore, Jeff Bezos flew from Seattle to San Francisco in a hurry to meet with Victor Mike Nelly. He introduced his own situation and hoped that Firefly Electronics would increase the monthly supply to Amazon by at least 50,000 units. Electronics retailers throughout the United States were waiting in line for Firefly Electronics to supply them. If they gave Amazon 50,000 units more, the physical retailers would definitely complain. Victor Mike Nelly naturally did not agree with Jeff Bezos' request. Bill Olson, who was a little impatient, even argued with Jeff Bezos. In the end, Jeff Bezos proposed to call Eric and let him decide. Seeing that Jeff Bezos was reluctant to leave San Francisco, Victor Mike Nelly had to call Eric in London. After a preliminary understanding of the ins and outs of the matter on the phone, Eric rushed back to his residence on Kensington Garden Avenue and held a video conference with Victor Mike Nelly, Jeff Bezos, and others who were far away in San Francisco. The discussion lasted until late at night. Under Eric's mediation, the two sides finally came up with a compromise. Amazon's supply would increase by 25,000 units, and the matter was barely resolved. In fact, Eric was also helpless in his heart. The technical content of the Firefly player was indeed not too high, but after all, it was a brand new electronic product. It could not be like CD players, mobile phones, and other electronic devices that had been around for many years. If necessary, as long as the right OEM was contacted, production could be achieved in just a few months. Because it was a brand new product, the Firefly player would not only be limited by the supply of components, but the assembly factory and production line of the product also needed to be built from scratch. In addition, there were various problems such as staff training. To achieve a production increase, the cycle was several times that of traditional electronic products. Although the problem between Firefly Electronics and Amazon was temporarily resolved through remote video conference, Eric did not want to continue to stay in London and decided to return to the United States in advance. There were indeed too many problems that needed to be solved personally. The Spice Girl selection was impossible to complete without 2 or 3 months. At that time, he just had to come back again. So, the next day, Eric boarded the Boeing 767 that Drew rented from ALC in Los Angeles. Because she was very satisfied with the trip to London, she signed a long-term lease contract with ALC and rented the Boeing 767. She planned to use it until her Boeing 747 was delivered. Although the monthly rent was as high as US $650,000 and did not include the cost of fuel for each flight, Eric did not object. Perhaps the monthly rent of US $650,000 was unaffordable for ordinary rich people, but this amount of money was nothing to him. After all, when the planned planes were delivered and the 2 private airports were built on the east and west coasts, the annual maintenance costs would be tens of millions of dollars. When Eric left the party last night, he asked Peter Ritchie to collect some information on the Polaroid. Although time was tight, Peter Ritchie sorted out a few documents about the Polaroid before Eric boarded the plane. The Boeing 767 took off from London's Heathrow Airport. After a short period of discomfort, the plane flew smoothly over the Atlantic Ocean. Eric sat next to the window of the luxurious suite in the cabin and flipped through the hologram information. Just like how he did not expect the working title film company to be backed by Polaroid Records, Eric did not expect Philips to be the controlling shareholder of Polaroid. His impression of Philips was basically a razor, and it seemed that there was also a DVD player and the like. However, after carefully reading the information, Eric realized that Philips was a very large company in the Netherlands. The company's business involved medical equipment, lighting equipment, home appliances, entertainment media, etc. It was a mini General Electric. In 1996, Philips' annual revenue was 108.5 billion Dutch guilders, which was close to US $37 billion. The purpose of Philips' involvement in the record industry was the same as Sony's, which was to promote their own music player products. In the early 1980s, Polaroid was jointly owned by Philips and Siemens of Germany. Then, Philips bought all of Polaroid's shares from Siemens in the late 1980s and listed it on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. Currently, Philips still owns 75% of Polaroid shares, and the other 15% were tradable shares. Based on the recent stock price, the market value of Polaroid was $9.7 billion US. When Eric saw this number, he had already given up the idea of buying Polaroid. It was not that he could not afford it, but it was not worth it. With a market value of $9.7 billion US, the final transaction would definitely be no less than $10 billion US. If Firefly wanted to take over, they could use a combination of funds and shares to easily take over the record company. However, if it was only for the rights to the songs in Polygram's hands, it was probably similar to Sony buying MGM to promote the Blu-ray format. A few years after Sony bought MGM, the era of streaming media came. Whether it was Sony's Blu-ray or Toshiba's HD, they became useless. Now, with the rise of the internet, the era of digital music had arrived in a few years. Also, according to Polaroid's 1996 annual financial report, the record company's annual operating revenue was $3.6 billion US, but the net profit was only $337.8 million US. Even if the record industry did not decline, it would take 30 years to recover the investment by spending $10 billion US to buy the company. Chapter 897. Back in Hollywood, the first thing Eric needed to deal with was the contract between MGM and Pierce Brosnan. The success of Casino Royale not only brought in huge profits for MGM, but also helped MGM's market capitalization break through the $12 billion mark. At the same time, Pierce Brosnan, who played James Bond, asked for an exorbitant amount of money for the sequel. He asked for what was probably the first contract in Hollywood history that offered a base salary of $20 million plus a 20% share of the profits, and he was only willing to sign one movie at a time. Based on the box office of Casino Royale, the value of this contract was close to $70 million. In recent years, the average salary of a first-tier Hollywood superstar was less than $20 million. Such an offer was simply ridiculous, and MGM naturally wouldn't agree. Because of Eric's appearance, so far, the highest salary record for a Hollywood actor was still $50 million for Jack Nicholson in Batman, and that was a complete accident. Hollywood stars such as Tom Cruise and Mel Gibson, who both starred and participated in the production, often only received $20 to $30 million from each movie. Although the global box office of Casino Royale was close to $1 billion, everyone knew that the participation of Eric himself and the popularity of MGM's agent movie universe was the key to the success of the movie. Pierce Brosnan's importance was far less than imagined. With the release of Casino Royale, the first half of the first stage of MGM's agent movie universe was completed, and the worldview of the entire agent movie universe was completed. In the plan, the second half of the first stage of the agent movie universe still included 6 movies. Now, The Breakin' Girls 3 had begun filming and was expected to be released in the summer of next year. Mission Impossible 3 was also in the early stages of intense preparation, and the release date was tentatively set at the end of next year. The contracts of the leading actors for these two movies had been confirmed in advance, and there would be no disputes for the time being. However, if the issue of Pierce Brosnan's salary could not be resolved properly, the other 4 films in the pipeline, Bond 19, Charlie's Angels 4, Mission Impossible 4, and Bond 20, would likely be delayed due to the long tug-of-war between MGM and the leading actors. Amy Pascal and Pierce Brosnan's agent had been talking for half a month. Perhaps MGM thought that they had grasped MGM's weakness, as they reluctantly agreed to reduce the profit-sharing clause to 15%. However, they had no intention of backing down on the fixed salary of US $20 million. Eric didn't want a contract to drag on for a few months or even a year, so he decided to intervene personally. Brantwood Country Club Golf Course in Santa Monica. It wasn't far from Firefly Studios in Playa Vista. Since Amy happened to have a membership card to the club, she suggested that they meet there. Since they had rushed back to Los Angeles, and it was Monday, Eric and Katzenberg habitually had breakfast together. They hadn't finished discussing some matters, so they rushed over with him. On the golf course, Eric missed his shot again. He ignored the girls' heartless laughter and bent down to correct the golf ball on the ground. He said to Katzenberg beside him, "So, now you understand why I signed a long-term contract with Stewart and the others. If I don't do this, the situation we face in the future will definitely be worse than MGM. They are a group of superheroes who can destroy the Earth. When the time comes, they will all ask for sky-high salaries, and Firefly will become their workers." Katzenberg glanced at Drew and Amy Pascal, who were whispering nearby, and said, "I'm just curious, how are you going to solve it this time?" Eric placed the ball and swung it. He looked at the white shadow that flew far away this time, and strolled towards the landing point in the distance with Katzenberg. He didn't answer the question directly, but said, "Everyone should understand who the real master of Hollywood is." Katzenberg shook his head helplessly and said, "But, Eric, you will make more and more A-list superstars refuse to cooperate with us." "You still don't understand, Jeffrey," Eric said. "At least, at Firefly, the era of superstars has ended early. The next 20 years, or even longer, will be the era of technology and special effects. Firefly is brewing the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MGM is about to launch the Lord of the Rings series, and many other projects in the plan. Their selling points will be visual effects and the story itself. Although the participation of A-list stars will be icing on the cake, they are not necessary." Although Katzenberg didn't quite agree with Eric's words, he still nodded. He turned his head and looked at Drew and Amy, who were also playing basketball not far away, and said, "So, Eric, do you have a plan for your next movie? You know, everyone asked me to ask this." In recent days, although the suppression effect of Casino Royale on other movies had been greatly reduced in the third week of release, Forest of Mount Tai, the third movie of Firefly Group's Bow-Way distribution system, still had a lukewarm start. Although the reviews were good, the film only grossed more than $16 million in the first 3 days, which was only half of MGM's Scream 2, which was released at the same time. Due to the gimmick of Rachel Weisz being killed at the beginning of the movie, Scream 2 grossed $92 million in the first 3 days. Based on the $24 million cost of Scream 2, MGM could fully recoup the cost in the first week. In comparison, on Firefly's side, the cost of Forest of Mount Tai was $55 million. Including Jedi Cop 2, which was hit by Casino Royale, and Prison in the Sky, which was also not very successful, Firefly's several live-action movies this year could almost be described as a failure. Although there was a new Final Destination 2 next, that movie could not be regarded as a mainstream movie. Therefore, even with Finding Nemo, which was enough to support the global box office for the entire summer, several senior executives of Firefly were still not happy, especially when Eric went to MGM to direct Casino Royale and achieved such dazzling results. The next movie. Eric pretended to be deep in thought and said, "When the girl group in England is established, I want to direct a music video first. A very interesting one." Katzenberg couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He wanted to yell, "Boss, can we do something serious?" In fact, if Eric was his subordinate and not his boss, Katzenberg would definitely have yelled at him with his fiery temper. Looking at Katzenberg's uncomfortable face, Eric smiled and comforted him. "Okay, Jeffrey, this kind of thing can't be rushed. You see, the global box office of Casino Royale will definitely reach 1 billion. Since I have already made 2 movies with 1 billion global box office, wouldn't it be better if the next movie can continue to maintain this level of box office?" Katzenberg couldn't help but imagine the scene described by Eric. He felt his facial muscles twitching again. He said, "You mean 3 consecutive movies with 1 billion global box office?" Eric nodded and said, "That's right. To be honest, I really want to surpass Jim's box office record, but I can't put my heart and soul into it like him, so I'll just have to win with quantity. If I can achieve a global box office of $1 billion for 3 consecutive movies, it should be considered a pioneering work." All right. Although Katzenberg felt that Eric's plan was a little unbelievable, he did not doubt Eric's ability to achieve such a miracle. However, as soon as he nodded, he immediately added, "However, Eric, you have to promise that the next movie will definitely belong to Firefly." "Of course, that's for sure." Eric nodded with a smile. He waved to Natasha, who was standing not far away, and changed the cue stick. He continued, "Also, I won't let everyone wait too long." The two chatted while playing. After a while, Drew and AI Me walked over with a middle-aged man in his 40s. AI Me was about to speak when the middle-aged man took the initiative to reach out and introduce himself. "Mr. Williams, hello, I'm Pierce's agent, Rick Kotzman." Eric shook hands with the other party politely and said, "I remember I said that I hope Pierce will come over in person." "I'm really sorry, Mr. Williams." Rick Kotzman looked embarrassed. There was no flaw in his expression. He said, "Pierce can't come because of an urgent matter. He also specifically asked me to apologize to you." In order to avoid being too stiff with the film company during the negotiation process, stars usually did not appear in person. This way, even if something happened, both sides could have some buffer room. Eric naturally knew the rules, so he was not angry. After Rick Kotzman greeted Katzenberg, he said, "In this case, let's be honest. MGM hopes to sign 4 contracts with Pierce at once, 2 for the main series and 2 for the crossover." When Eric said this, Rick Kotzman interrupted, "Mr. Williams, this won't do. We will only sign 1 contract with MGM each time." Eric glanced at Rick Kotzman and waited for the other party to shut up tactfully before continuing, "Out of the 4 contracts, I have 2 compensation plans here. First, the 2 main series will pay $20 million each, and the crossover will pay $15 million each, totaling $70 million US. If Pierce is willing to choose this plan, MGM can pay the full amount in one go. Second, the base salary of all 4 films is $10 million US. Pierce can get 10% of the box office profits from the main series, and 5% of the profits from the crossover. Rick Kotzman couldn't help but open his mouth several times, but he endured it. When Eric finished, he couldn't wait to shake his head and said, "Mr. Williams, this contract is too insincere. We won't agree. You know, Casino Royale can bring $1 billion in box office to MGM." "Yes." Eric nodded and looked at Rick Kotzman with a faint smile. He said, "It seems that you also know this. It is Casino Royale that brings $1 billion in box office to MGM, not Pierce Brosnan." Rick Kotzman didn't expect his own words to trap himself, but he was used to this kind of scene. His expression didn't change at all, and he insisted, "But, compared to the profits that Pierce brings to MGM, I think we should get enough compensation." Eric held a cue in his hand and nodded in agreement. He said, "In this case, I recommend you to choose the second compensation plan. I think that Pierce will definitely get more. It is not impossible for him to get $100 million in the end." When Rick Kotzman heard the figure of $100 million, his heart couldn't help but jump. If that was the case, he could get $10 million as an agent. In the whole of Hollywood, there was no agent who could get a $10 million commission from a star. Even Michael Ovitz couldn't do this. However, after a short trance, Rick Kotzman quickly calmed down. At the same time, he understood another thing. Since Eric said such a thing, he must be confident in the box office of the next few films. In this case, MGM would not allow Pierce Brosnan to leave. Rick Kotzman was secretly proud that he had found another bargaining chip. He smiled and said, "Mr. Williams, I just said that Pierce will only sign a contract with MGM once, and the compensation just now is definitely not enough." "I think you misunderstood one thing, Rick." Eric shook his head and said, "I am not negotiating with you now. I am just informing you of my decision." Rick Kotzman was stunned. He looked at Drew and AI Me next to him and shook his head with a smile. He said, "Mr. Williams, it seems that we can't reach any agreement today." Eric ignored Rick Kotzman's look at the girl and AI Me and continued, "Of course, I don't have time to delay this matter for too long. Now go back and talk to Pierce. You have 1 day to think about it. At this time tomorrow, if MGM doesn't recover, we will release an announcement and start to choose a new bond. Oh, by the way, forget about Pierce's remaining contract with MGM. Let's part on good terms." Rick Kotzman stared at Eric for a few seconds, then nodded decisively and said, "Well, in that case, I will tell Pierce." After that, Rick Kotzman didn't stay any longer. He nodded to the others and turned to walk out of the golf course. He was sure that MGM wouldn't easily replace Bond. He thought that Eric's words were just to force them to accept the contract, so he didn't hesitate to fight back. He believed that even if they didn't give a reply tomorrow, MGM wouldn't publicly replace Bond. After all, MGM's market value had just risen to $12 billion recently. This was completely stimulated by the box office success of Casino Royale. If MGM dared to kick Pierce out at this time, the stock price was likely to plummet. This was very unfavorable for MGM, who was about to finance the acquisition of several cable TV stations. After Rick Kotzman walked away, Katzenberg, who had been listening quietly, looked at Amy Pascal, who was worried, and asked, "Eric, isn't this a bit too much?" Eric gently swung his club and hit the small ball on the ground into a hole not far away. He shook his head and said, "I'm not betting anything. If Brosnan doesn't accept this contract, then forget it. If we choose to give in this time, Kevin Costner, Kate, and the other two will all ask for equal pay. When that time comes, the pay of an actor will be higher than the production cost, and a large portion of the profits will be taken away. Then, there will be no need for us to proceed with the whole plan. Instead of that, it's better to be tough now, so that others won't ask for too much. Moreover, compared to the other two series, the risk of replacing Bond is actually the least. After all, this series has already replaced several 007s. Well, Amy, don't look like that. I'll continue to be the producer of Bond 19. Tell me, how are the negotiations with Basic Entertainment about Rainbow Media?" On the other side, Rick Kotzman separated from Eric and the others. He tried his best to suppress the urge to look back. He did not stop walking, but there was an inexplicable anger in his heart. Or perhaps, he did not know what kind of emotion it was. In short, when he walked out of the golf course, he even felt his body trembling slightly. $70 million for a fixed salary and $40 million for a base salary plus a share of the profits. Alright, this was indeed a huge sum of money. However, this was 4 movies. Perhaps, alright, but they definitely did not dare to lose Pierce. Definitely. So firm in his belief, Rick Kotzman came to the parking lot and got into his gray Chevrolet. Pierce Brosnan, who was sitting in the passenger seat, immediately looked over expectantly. "Rick, how is it?" Shaking his head, Rick Kotzman suddenly decided not to tell Brosnan about Eric's conditions. Anyway, MGM definitely wouldn't dare to make an announcement tomorrow. If he said it, it might shake the confidence of his customers, so he said, "There's still no result. Pierre, let's go back to Century City first." Pierce Brosnan felt that his agent's expression was a little strange, so he asked, "What did Eric say?" Rick Kotzman calmly started the car and said, "It's still the same words. I hope you can reduce the salary." Well, he also played the emotional card. "Don't worry, I'll try my best to get in touch with Amy Pascal. This woman should be our breakthrough. Seeing that his agent had started the car, Pierce Brosnan had to stop asking. He originally planned to meet Eric with Rick Kotzman, but he was persuaded by his agent to stay in the car. Rick Kotzman had been his agent since he entered Hollywood. Over the years, the two had cooperated well, so Pierce Brosnan didn't suspect that he would hide anything from him. Chapter 898. The next morning, at the Burbank headquarters of Firefly. As a fantasy film project that Disney Pictures would focus on in the next 10 years, Eric had already sent the first draft of Harry Potter back to Los Angeles in advance when he was in the UK and distributed it to several core executives of Firefly, hoping that they could understand the content of the novel in advance. At the same time, Eric had also personally communicated with Murdoch several times. HarperCollins, a publishing company under News Corporation, would release the first book in the series, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, in the UK, the US, Australia, and other English-speaking countries at the same time in early September. After gaining enough influence, they would continue to promote it to non-English-speaking countries. Firefly Group would also invest enough media resources to promote the novel. Although the film project would not be officially established until the Harry Potter novel had enough influence, because Katzenberg, Frank Wells, and others who had read the novel were very optimistic about the story, everyone agreed to hold a special meeting to discuss it and make a detailed film and theme park development plan in advance. Different from traditional fairy tales such as Snow White, Cinderella, and the Mermaid, the Harry Potter series has a great advantage that it is easier for people to feel immersed in it. The novel is set in real London, which can give readers the illusion that the story is happening around them, which can attract their interest to the story to the greatest extent. But at the same time, it also tells an interesting adventure in the magical world. Unlike the grotesque Alice in Wonderland, this story is much more approachable. That's because, ever since we were young, we've been surrounded by countless rumors about sorcerers and magic. In the conference room, Eric was briefly explaining why he was optimistic about the story when the door of the conference room was suddenly knocked a few times. His thoughts were interrupted, and Eric looked at the door with some displeasure. He saw his female assistant, Kelly Haynes, open the door apologetically and made an urgent gesture to him. Peter Ritchie had rushed to the FFM TV station. Before the new personal assistant was selected, Kelly temporarily took over the position. Eric nodded and motioned for everyone to wait. He walked to the door of the conference room and asked, "Kelly, what's wrong?" Kelly gave him the phone in her hand and explained, "Amy called." Eric put the phone to his ear and said hello. On the other side, Amy Pascal said something in an urgent tone. Eric frowned, but he didn't hesitate and said, "If that's the case, then do as I said yesterday. Call Yahoo and tell them to make an announcement. There's nothing to talk about, I'll explain to Barbara." Board of Directors? Heh, AI me, this is Hollywood, we have the final say. After you make the announcement, contact Kapoor and ask him to start looking for a new candidate for Bond. Kevin Costner seems to be from CAA as well. If that's the case, the script for Disc 3 needs to be adjusted to add more supporting roles to replace Ethan Hunt. That's all, I'm hanging up now. When Kelly heard the conversation between Eric and Amy, she could guess what had happened. She took the phone from Eric. Seeing that he was deep in thought, she asked carefully, "Eric, are you really going to replace Brosnan?" Eric organized his thoughts and nodded. "Yeah, you heard it too." Kelly's tone was obviously worried. "But won't the impact be too big?" "There will be an impact, but it's not as serious as you think. The Agent cinematic universe has been built, and now the audience's interest in the series itself is not much lower than the protagonists." Eric explained. Seeing that the worry on Kelly's face did not lessen at all, he smiled and said, "Think about it, now that I've agreed to Brosnan's salary, if we want to continue to complete the series, the other people's salaries will also increase. The production cost of the next few films may even be close to US $200 million. In addition to the fixed salary, the profit share that the protagonists ask for is estimated to be no less than 30% of each film. In this case, even if the next 6 films all maintain a global box office of US $1 billion, we won't have much profit. Moreover, this kind of expectation is unrealistic. If one of the films fails at the box office, the whole series will not be able to continue. Now, replacing Brosnan, who is the least risky, shows MGM's determination, and the other protagonists in the other two series will not be so fearless before they ask for too much. In fact, Eric had a deeper reason for making this decision. He just suddenly thought that perhaps this matter could be an opportunity. Because in the Firefly system, the traditional profit distribution rules of Hollywood were no longer suitable. Other than the Firefly system, the other major film companies were either listed companies or controlled by consortiums that did not have much control over Hollywood. This also led to the fact that when the major film companies launched a movie, the company's senior management and the project's main creative team would not consider the interests of shareholders and investors at all. Take Lethal Weapon 4, which was being produced by Warner Brothers, for example. The production company in charge of the production was Joe Silver's production company. The high budget of US $140 million mainly came from the speculative hot money that had flocked to Hollywood in recent years. Therefore, Mel Gibson, as the lead actor of this film, which was expected to only earn US $300 million at the global box office, received a sky-high salary of US $30 million. The producer, Joe Silver, also received a base salary of US $8 million plus a share of the box office in the later stages. The other main creators, such as the director, scriptwriter, and supporting actors, also received generous compensation. In the end, Warner Brothers would definitely not be able to earn a single cent from the box office. They could only hope for some profits from the DVD and TV broadcast rights in the later stages. Moreover, under Hollywood's special financial system, whether external investors would be able to recover their US $140 million investment was another matter. It was even more impossible for them to make money. As far as Eric knew, Wall Street's film funds, which were responsible for guiding the hot money from Europe and Asia to invest in Hollywood films, had an average annual return of less than 10%, and losses were everywhere. In the end, as far as the entire project was concerned, Mel Gibson had made a lot of money, Joe Silver had also reaped a lot of benefits, the director, scriptwriter, and other main creators had also made money, and the senior management of Time Warner who was in charge of this project would definitely receive sufficient salary and bonuses. The box office of the film would also make Time Warner's revenue report more beautiful. Everyone was happy. Only Time Warner shareholders and investors who provided the production budget for the film did not receive any benefits, because they did not belong to Hollywood and could not obtain their own share of the cake from Hollywood's profit chain. Due to the closed financial operation system, Firefly played the roles of shareholders and investors at the same time, the latter two roles that were excluded from Hollywood's profit chain. In the original space-time, even 10 or 20 years later, although batches of spendthrifts continued to throw money into Hollywood, because they were unable to obtain enough power to change the rules, most of them returned after being cheated. Sony Pictures, which barely survived in Hollywood, was basically just an ATM machine for Hollywood stars like Will Smith and Adam Sandler, who were often on the lowest ranking list of Hollywood stars. Now, since he firmly controlled the two major Hollywood film companies and maintained a strong influence on the other film company, Fox, and had enough power to change the rules, Eric naturally could not allow this situation to continue. The first thing that needed to be changed was naturally the increasingly unreasonable high salary of Hollywood stars. Perhaps in the process of changing the rules, there would be a situation of self-destruction, but if he did not change and the situation continued to develop, not only would Firefly lose more and more of the profits that should have belonged to the film company, but at the same time, they would not be able to fundamentally gain control of Hollywood. As for stars, many people may have forgotten one thing. All the A-list stars in Hollywood were created by major film studios through film investment. What's more, Firefly's system, which focused on special effects films and animated films, was far less dependent on stars than other major film companies. The same morning, at the Sunset Tower Hotel in Beverly Hills, Pierce Brosnan was attending a new product exhibition of the Omega watch. He had recently won the endorsement of this Swiss watch brand. After the regular process of product exhibition, it was time for the media question and answer session. The topic naturally could not escape from Casino Royale and the next 007. Regarding the plot of Bond 19, I haven't seen the script yet, and even if I see the script, I can't disclose it at will. Haha, let's ask some other questions. On the simple stage, Brosnan and the host sat in simple armchairs, holding a microphone, with a smile on their faces, and answered the reporter's questions gracefully and skillfully. Although the contract for the sequel was still in the process of negotiation, he never thought that he would give up this role, even if he had to make some concessions in the end. After all, since his first appearance on the big screen in 1980, he had worked hard for more than 10 years to reach the peak of his career today. How could he give up? What's more, he was about to turn 45 years old. Although the career of a male star in Hollywood was far longer than that of a female star, at his current age, there were not many mainstream blockbuster roles that were suitable for him other than Bond. After answering a question, the host next to Brosnan was about to choose the next questioner. Suddenly, at least 10 cell phones in the conference hall rang abruptly. The rather monotonous and even ear-piercing ringtones instantly filled the hall. Brosnan was startled, and the host was even more embarrassed. Holding the microphone, he forced a joke and said, "Well, maybe the Martians are attacking Earth, but before Earth is destroyed, let's finish this press conference first, shall we?" Amidst a burst of laughter, the reporters whose phones rang off the stage took the initiative to turn off their phones. However, the other staff members in the hall did not have such scruples. They all stepped aside to answer the phone. Therefore, as soon as the host picked the next questioner and handed the microphone over, Brosnan's public relations manager, Sarah Lindert, rushed to the stage in a panic. Ignoring the shocked looks of the others, she quickly whispered a few words in Brosnan's ear. Immediately, Brosnan stood up. Although he immediately realized that he had lost his composure, Brosnan did not care about anything else. He simply apologized and left the stage in a hurry. At this time, the group of reporters in the audience also realized that the phone call just now must have something to do with Brosnan, and something big must have happened, so they took out their phones again and called back. In the corridor outside the conference hall, Brosnan quickly walked to the elevator. Paul Darrick, the president of Omega North America, who also received a phone call, followed him and asked quickly, "Pierce, what the hell is going on? If you don't want to play Bond anymore, you shouldn't have signed the contract with us. This is simply fraud. We have the right to cancel the contract and ask for compensation." Brosnan walked into the elevator with his public relations manager, pressed a few buttons frantically, and said to Paul Darrick, who was chasing after him, with an equally embarrassed expression, "I'm sorry, Paul, I don't even know what happened now. Can you give me some time?" Paul Darrick still wanted to ask, but he noticed that Brosnan was also confused, so he had to say, "Okay, but you have to give me an answer as soon as possible." Brosnan nodded and reached out to press the elevator button a few more times. Suddenly, he remembered something. Before the elevator door closed, he pulled his public relations manager out of the elevator and said, "Sarah, call Rick, immediately." Okay. Sarah Lindert quickly took out her phone from her bag and handed Brosnan's phone to her. In order to avoid being disturbed at the event just now, she had been saving Brosnan's phone for him. However, as soon as she took out the phones, the two phones rang almost at the same time. Perhaps the situation was not chaotic enough, but before the two could answer the phone, the group of reporters who were originally at the Omega event site had already rushed out frantically. "Mr. Brosnan, is the announcement just released by Yahoo true? Pierce, did you really turn down a $100 million package contract with MGM? Pierce, you seem to have just received this news. Is there any secret behind this? Move. Sorry, we can't comment on this matter for the time being. Everyone, please move aside. We will give the media an answer as soon as possible." Half an hour later, Brosnan finally arrived at the headquarters of CAA in Century City with his public relations manager. At this time, the announcement that MGM had released through Yahoo, Brosnan has given up the role of 007. Bond 19 will be recasting, had spread throughout Hollywood. Chapter 899. CAA Headquarters in Century City. Richard Lovett, the president of CAA, was no longer as calm as he used to be. He ignored the surprised gazes of the other employees and practically ran into the office building with his two assistants. He was still on the phone. "Pierre, calm down. It's not as bad as you think. I'm already downstairs." "Yes, right away." With that, he rushed all the way to the elevator. Remembering that there was no cell phone signal in the elevator, Richard Lovett walked to the stairwell without hesitation. At the same time, he took the other phone from his assistant. "This is Richard Lovett." "Hi, Kevin. I know, something did happen. There must be some misunderstanding. Don't worry, I'm personally in charge of you. Don't you trust me?" Okay, that's it, I'll treat you to a meal when you're free." Richard Lovett answered several calls along the way. He found himself habitually running to the floor where his office was located. He cursed loudly and glared at his two assistants who forgot to remind him. He then turned around and rushed downstairs. Richard Lovett was negotiating a movie project with the other party at the Warner headquarters in Burbank this morning. When he suddenly heard that MGM would give up on Brosnan and pick up 007, he even thought that someone was joking with him. With the box office of Casino Royale going straight to $1 billion worldwide, there would definitely be some twists and turns in the salary negotiation between MGM and Brosnan. However, no one in Hollywood would believe that the two sides would fall out. It wasn't until his assistant showed him a copy of the Yahoo article that Richard Lovett believed it was true. But then, another piece of news came, which made him jump up from his chair in the Warner office and rush out. It turned out that Pierce Brosnan himself had no idea beforehand that MGM had given up on Brosnan and picked up 007 instead. It was Brosnan's agent, Rick Kotzman, who had made the decision without informing Brosnan at all. He had privately rejected the contract offered by MGM, which could have been worth up to $100 million. Oh my God! $100 million. The total amount that CAA earned for its thousands of clients every year was only about $1 billion. Rick Kotzman had ruined nearly 10% of CAA's annual income. Moreover, if they only lost this contract, although it would be a pity, the situation wouldn't be too bad. The worst part of this matter was that Rick Kotzman made the decision to reject this sky-high contract without consulting his client at all. If word of this got out, it would definitely severely damage CAA's reputation in the eyes of its clients. In the brokerage industry, if a brokerage company lost the trust of its clients and caused a large loss of clients, it wouldn't be far from bankruptcy. But in fact, all kinds of speculations about this matter had now spread throughout Hollywood. On the way back to the company headquarters from Burbank, Richard Lovett had received 7 or 8 calls from important clients asking about this matter. If they couldn't handle this crisis well, CAA's competitors wouldn't let go of this opportunity to poach them. When Michael Ovitz left 3 years ago, CAA had already gone through a turbulence and suffered a great loss. The company had just gotten back on track in the past 2 years and definitely couldn't withstand another major shock. After climbing to the 12th floor and rushing down, Richard Lovett wiped the sweat off his forehead and finally arrived at the 9th floor where Brosnan's agent, Rick Kotzman, was. Through the open office area, Richard Lovett immediately saw Rick Kotzman walking towards him with a tissue covering the corner of his eye. Brosnan was nowhere to be seen. Seeing Richard Lovett, Rick Kotzman quickened his pace and walked over with an apologetic face. "Richard, I'm so sorry, I didn't expect this to happen." Before he could finish, Rick Kotzman felt Richard Lovett reach out and grab him by the neck and drag him to the glass wall. Rick Kotzman was a head taller than Richard Lovett, but he also knew how much trouble he had caused. At this time, in the face of his boss's violent actions, he did not dare to resist at all. He was dragged over like a little chick who had accepted his fate. The other CAA employees in the office area were even more silent. They all consciously looked away and stayed far away. "Rick, I don't want to hear you say sorry now." Richard Lovett came to the glass wall and continued to use force to push Rick Kotzman's head in front of him. He leaned close to his ear and quickly said in a dark tone, "Listen, I know about the little tricks you played in the negotiation of the Coca-Cola advertising contract last time. I also know that you took a $100,000 rebate when you introduced the spokesperson for Johnson & Johnson. Also, you just bought a mansion in Beverly Hills and have a $3 million loan to repay. So, what you have to do now is find a place and hide yourself. In the next month, if I hear anything about you or you take the initiative to contact the media, trust me, I'll bankrupt you and send you to prison. And your wife who is a model for Sports Illustrated and your daughter who is about to go to Stan University. Without your financial support, they're nothing. I'll send them all to the dirtiest strip club in Los Angeles. Do you understand? Very well, now, get out of here." Richard Lovett's face was ferocious. He pushed Rick Kotzman away and suddenly thought of something. He grabbed Rick Kotzman and said, "One more thing, Mr. Kotzman, you're fired." Richard Lovett told his assistant to call security to drag the defeated Rick Kotzman out. He raised his hand and rubbed his stiff face a few times. He put down his hand and the ferocious expression was replaced by a friendly smile. Richard Lovett looked at the glass wall not far away and exhaled. He pushed open the door of Rick Kotzman's office and walked in. Although it had been cleaned up, the office still looked a little messy. The landline phone on the desk had disappeared, the oil painting on the wall had lost its glass frame, and there were some glass shards on the floor. A large piece of the blinds that blocked the outside of the office area had been pulled down and was drooping casually. One could imagine what had just happened in this office. Another important partner of the company, David O'Connor, was sitting at the desk with Pierce Brosnan, comforting each other. Pierce Brosnan's public relations manager, Sarah Lindert, was standing by the window and making a phone call. Seeing Richard Kotzman walk in, Brosnan immediately stood up. He lost his usual gentlemanly demeanor and said loudly, "Richard, you have to give me an explanation. I was fired from the Bond crew. The funny thing is that I didn't know anything." "I know, Pierre, I'm sorry, I'm very, very sorry." Richard Lovett put his arm around Brosnan's shoulder and said, "I've called Amy Pascal from MGM. This is just a misunderstanding. Really, they just want to lower your salary. You know, film companies like to play these dirty tricks. Trust me, I'll definitely get the Bond contract that belongs to you. Now, let's go to my office and discuss what to do next." Brosnan impatiently shook off Richard Lovett's arm and said, "I don't want to listen to your perfunctory words. If you can't solve this matter as soon as possible, I'll contact the next agency right away. Of course, I swear, from now on, I'll be personally responsible for all your affairs." Richard Lovett, who was shaken off by Brosnan, was not angry at all. He still had a smile on his face and said, "Let's go to my office first, Pierre. I'll show you something. After you see it, you'll know that MGM won't dare to shake you off." "Okay." Brosnan nodded reluctantly and immediately said, "And from now on, I have to be present for all the negotiations. You can't make any decisions behind my back. I promise, I won't hide anything from you. Even if you want to know the color of my wife's underwear, I can tell you. It's white, and I've secretly worn it." Seeing that Brosnan's tone had softened, Richard Lovett breathed a sigh of relief and continued to tell dirty jokes to liven up the atmosphere. He eagerly opened the office door and even bowed and gestured for Brosnan to leave. After Brosnan left the office, Richard Lovett pointed at Sarah Lindert, gave David O'Connor a quick look, and then followed him out. The two of them had just spoken on the phone, so David O'Connor naturally understood Richard Lovett's intention. In fact, he was so eager to coax Brosnan out of the office to create an opportunity for him to interact with Sarah Lindert. Sarah Lindert was also a very shrewd woman. She didn't rush to follow them out. Instead, she hung up the phone and stood there, smiling at David O'Connor. Although Brosnan was in a fit of anger and wouldn't notice that his public relations manager was lagging behind, David O'Connor didn't dare to waste time and went straight to the point. "Sarah, you have to help us this time." Sarah Lindert shook her head and said, "David, you've really gone too far this time. I'm afraid I can't help much. Pierce will fire me too." Two clients of the same level as Pierce. David O'Connor ignored Sarah Lindert's words and directly stated his price. "You just have to ensure that the news that Pierce is completely unaware of MGM's offer won't be leaked out. You don't have to do anything else." The most crucial part of this storm was that Rick Kotzman had concealed MGM's offer from Brosnan. Sarah Lindert also knew that if this matter was leaked out, it would have a very bad impact on CAA. She didn't say anything and just shook 4 fingers. David O'Connor didn't hesitate. "Deal." Sarah Lindert didn't stop there. She said, "How can I be sure that you'll fulfill your promise after this matter is over?" "You know that we'll do what we say." David O'Connor gritted his teeth. He knew that the situation was urgent and couldn't be delayed because of this small matter. He hesitated for a moment and said, "You can find a recording pen." I'll repeat what I said just now. Then it's settled. Sarah Lynn Dirt nodded with a smile. She didn't look for a recording pen. She just shook the latest Motorola phone in her hand. Obviously, she had already made a recording just now. David O'Connor cursed in his heart, but the smile on his face didn't change. He said, "Then, let's go up now." Sarah Lynn Dirt didn't care what David O'Connor thought of her. She smiled and walked out of the office with him. She said, "You'll definitely make Rick Kotzman shut up, right? But what about Pierce?" David O'Connor said, "Richard will persuade him." In the president's office of CAA, Richard Lovett was showing Pierce Brosnan a stock chart on the computer monitor. "Pierce, look. The opening price of MGM Pictures today was $28.37. But here, after MGM announced that they were going to replace Bond, it took a sharp turn. Now, MGM's share price has fallen to $27.49, a drop of 3.1%. This is equivalent to MGM's market value falling from $12.34 billion to $11.958 billion. In just 1 hour, MGM's market value has evaporated by $400 million. This is all because of the announcement that they are going to replace you. And I'm sure that if MGM doesn't take any remedial measures, the company's share price will fall by at least 3% this afternoon. The market value of MGM has evaporated by $800 million in a day. MGM's shareholders will never allow this to continue. The only thing they can do to stop the share price from falling is to invite you back." After hearing Richard Lovett's explanation, Brosnan relaxed a little. However, he still asked, "So, what should we do now? Do we just wait for the news?" "Of course not. I'll continue to keep in touch with Amy Pascal from MGM. Of course, I'll tell you the results of any communication as soon as possible," Richard Lovett said. His eyes flashed, and his tone became more sincere. "However, Pierre, during this time, I need you to cooperate with me and remain silent, to MGM, to the media, and to everyone else. This way, I can fight for your benefits as much as possible. Well, especially the fact that Rick hid it from you. I've already fired that bastard, and I promise you that he will never appear in the agent business again. But this must not be leaked, because it will put all of us in a passive position. Do you understand?" Pierce Brosnan originally thought that if he had no choice, he would leak the news that he knew nothing about MGM's offer. This way, he might be able to get the 007 film contract back. However, after being led by Richard Lovett, although he felt that something was wrong, he still felt that maybe he really shouldn't leak the news that would put him in a passive position. So, he nodded cooperatively. "Very good." Richard Lovett heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He nodded with a friendly smile and said, "Then, drink your coffee first. I'll go talk to Amy Pascal on the phone." Chapter 900. Richard Lovett was busy dealing with CAA's possible trust crisis. Just a few kilometers away, the MGM headquarters in Century City was also restless. It had only been an hour since the announcement that the 007 series would choose a new lead actor. A group of fans had already gathered outside the MGM headquarters, holding up all kinds of signs to protest MGM's decision to replace Pierce Brosnan. Another group of reporters from major media outlets also waited outside the MGM headquarters, hoping to get more information. In order to avoid any accidents, Amy Pascal had to send most of the company's security guards outside the building to maintain order. MGM's stock price, which had been soaring due to the box office success of Casino Royale, suddenly began to fall with the announcement. Due to the continuous acquisitions of entertainment TV stations, the investment in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the possible equity deal with Rainbow Media, MGM, which had been running low on funds, had launched a new round of debt financing. The sudden drop in the company's stock price was definitely not good news. Within an hour of the announcement, the cell phones of several senior executives of MGM were flooded with calls from various parties. One of the company's board of directors had even flown over from New York to Los Angeles and requested for an emergency board meeting to discuss the matter of replacing Brosnan. After MGM completed the last stock increase, Drew's shareholding had fallen to 33.5%, and Ltd's shareholding had also fallen to 8.4%. Vivendi, which had participated in the acquisition of MGM, held 16.8% of the shares. Several European film funds held 15.1%, and the remaining 26% of the shares were all tradable shares. Vivendi and several other film funds were naturally united because they were all from Europe. Although they were destined to not be able to gain control of MGM, MGM's management couldn't completely ignore their influence. The director, Pierre Telek, who had come from New York, was the spokesperson of Vivendi and several other film funds on the MGM board of directors. There were a total of 7 people on the MGM board of directors. In addition to the 4 external independent directors hired according to the regulations of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the other 3 were Drew, Amy Pascal, and Pierre Telek. He was the CEO of the Havas Group's American branch of Vivendi's advertising and media giant. At the end of a corridor at the MGM headquarters, Amy Pascal, who was standing by the window, hung up the phone with Richard Lovett. She looked relieved. She handed the phone to her assistant and asked her to help her answer any calls that might come in. She pushed open the door of the conference room and walked in. In the conference room, Drew, Frank Marcheso, and John Carey were discussing the casting plan for the Lord of the Rings trilogy with Peter Jackson. In the past 2 years, Peter Jackson had only directed a low-budget thriller as practice. Most of his energy was still focused on the preparation of the Lord of the Rings series. Not only had he completed all the pre-production work of the movie, but he also spent 3 months in the Australian branch of the Digital Domain in the first half of this year to understand the production process of the CG special effects in detail. Now, the entire The Lord of the Rings trilogy could be said to be completely imprinted in Peter Jackson's mind. As long as he got the budget and officially started production, he was 100% confident that he could perfectly present Thor King's legendary epic on the big screen. Seeing Amy Pascal walk in, Peter Jackson couldn't help but pause. Of course, he knew what happened at MGM today. Frank Marcheso and John Carey looked over at the same time. When they completed the acquisition of MGM, the 2 of them didn't choose to leave the company, considering that this veteran film giant might rise again with the support of Firefly Group. Now, it proved that their choice was correct. However, today's incident really caught them off guard. They still couldn't believe that Eric really decided to give up on Brosnan. Although they had turned off their phones, the continuous ringing of the phone still lingered in their minds. Although Drew also looked up, she didn't look worried like the others. As long as this was Eric's decision, she didn't care even if MGM went bankrupt. However, the girl still took the initiative to ask, "Amy, who is it this time?" "Richard Lovett," Amy replied and sat down next to the girl. She continued, "Richard just hinted to me that Brosnan's agent, Rick Kotzman, acted on his own initiative. Richard has already fired Kotzman. Drew, they want to talk again." Although they heard some rumors, because Richard Lovett tried his best to cover it up, no one in Hollywood knew the ins and outs of Rick Kotzman's private rejection of the 007 contract. Drew naturally thought that Amy's hint from Richard Lovett was an excuse. In fact, this might be what Richard Lovett wanted to see. However, Drew obviously didn't care about this. He only said, "They rejected it as they wanted, and now they want to talk again. Are they playing with us?" "Drew, I think there might be some misunderstanding. Even if Pierce didn't agree to Eric's offer, he wouldn't have rejected it so directly." Amy continued to persuade, "Also, giving up on Brosnan won't do us any good. We're about to go into debt financing. Morgan Stanley has already called. They think that if we replace Brosnan, it might affect the market's enthusiasm for investing in MGM bonds." The girl blinked and spread her hands. "Why don't you discuss it with Eric? I'm just a puppet. There's a rumor that Brosnan seems to be completely unaware of your offer. When you were in the meeting this morning, Amy called again and said that CAA wants to talk again." It was already noon in the cafeteria of Firefly's Burbank headquarters. Kelly and Eric sat together for lunch and talked about what happened in the morning. Eric finished a mouthful of spaghetti and looked up. "Do you believe that Brosnan really didn't know?" Kelly thought for a moment and said, "I think that even if it's true, CAA will make it sound fake. After all, CAA will be in big trouble if they hide something so important from their clients. No star wants an agent who likes to make decisions on their own to manage their affairs. However, I don't think CAA's agent is stupid enough to hide this from Brosnan. This is a $70 million contract. So, this is probably fake news released by CAA. They just want to find an excuse to salvage the situation. Eric smiled and didn't say anything. He changed the topic and said, "So, have you picked someone to be my new personal assistant?" Kelly actually wanted to ask Eric what he was thinking, but seeing that he changed the topic, she could only say, "There's someone very suitable, but I don't think I should send her to a bad guy like you." "Oh, it seems like you'd rather do it yourself," Eric teased. He looked at Kelly's blushing face and smiled. "Are you talking about Carolyn?" Kelly nodded and said, "I've talked to Carolyn. She's quite willing. However, Eric, Carolyn is really a good girl. Don't hurt her." Eric thought for a moment and felt that he couldn't guarantee anything. So he said, "How about we find someone else?" Kelly rolled her eyes at Eric and said gently, "Eric, I can tell that Carolyn really wants to be by your side. So, if you don't want to do it, you should talk to her personally. It's best if you can get her to change jobs. You know what I mean." Eric hesitated for a moment and nodded solemnly. "Okay, I'll find some time in the next 2 days." As he said that, Eric's phone rang. He picked it up and said hello. After listening to the other party say a few words, Eric sneered and said, "Amy, do you think it's still 10 years ago when those agents can barge into the office of a film company's executive? Okay, if they're really sincere, don't think about the contract. It's still yesterday's contract for 4 films, $60 million. The contract will be signed tomorrow morning. I don't care if Pierce really didn't know about it. Even if he did, it's his own mistake. This is your last chance. Pierre Telek? I don't know this person, and I'm not interested. You can just send him away. I'm going to San Francisco in the afternoon. That's all. If there's nothing else, don't call me again." Kelly watched Eric hang up the phone and throw it aside. She couldn't help but remind him, "Eric, Pierre Telek is the spokesperson for MGM's European shareholders." "I know." Kelly paused for a moment and said, "Then why are you?" "Those who don't care can just pretend that they don't know." Eric shrugged and looked at Kelly's stunned expression. He sighed and said, "Perhaps, everyone now thinks that I'm being a little stubborn, right?" Kelly noticed the faint loneliness in Eric's expression. She subconsciously shook her head, but then she gently nodded her head. Eric just shook his head again and said, "From everything that happened today, you, Amy, and a lot of people around you, even the media, are firmly trapped in the existing shackles of Hollywood's existing rules. Everyone seems to think that since Casino Royale's box office is so good, as the male lead, Brosnan should be paid $100 million. But I never thought that way, and I don't think Brosnan is worth that price. There was no shortage of actors in Hollywood. Even if I offered a fixed weekly salary to recruit 007, there would still be a line from Malibu all the way to Burbank to get this job. So, from today onwards, no, from yesterday onwards, I will slowly tell everyone that nothing is taken for granted. If you want something to be taken for granted, then go back to the era of big studios. At that time, everyone also thought it was natural for actors to receive a fixed weekly salary." Kelly quietly looked at Eric, who was becoming more and more determined. She gradually understood something and said softly, "But, it's very difficult." "Look." Eric put down his cutlery and waved his hand in the air. He said, "Now that I own half of Hollywood, I will definitely own all of Hollywood in the future. Since that's the case, it's not difficult." F*CK, F*CK, F*CK. At CAA's headquarters, Richard Lovett almost jumped up and cursed a few times. He slammed the phone in his hand on the floor and the broken parts flew everywhere. He took a deep breath and immediately roared, "Peter, get me a new phone." An assistant opened the door with trembling hands and handed over a new phone. Richard Lovett took the phone, pressed a few buttons, and then slammed it on the floor. He shouted at the door, "Peter, you can get out now." Eric, oh no, I don't want to hear that name again in my life. You can get out too. Is there anyone alive? Get me a phone with an address book. Dozens of seconds later, just as Richard Lovett was about to kick the office door, the door finally opened again. A woman with a frightened face pushed the door open with a phone in her hand. Mr. Lovett, here you go. Richard Lovett grabbed the phone and quickly found an address book. It's urgent this time, you have to help me. I remember you know Pierre Truck, the director of MGM. Of course, about Pierce's contract with MGM. I know that this was decided by Williams himself, but we have to try. I heard that Pierre is already in Los Angeles. Can you help me contact him? I want to see him after he gets off the plane. Thank you very much. Oh, Lena wants to go to the opening party of the Titanic exhibition hall. No problem, absolutely no problem. I'll get someone to send a few tickets to your house this afternoon. Of course, I still owe you a favor. I won't forget it, even in my next life. Okay, I'll definitely repay you in this life, haha. Laughing heartily, Richard Lovett hung up the phone and called his partner, David O'Connor. Lowering his voice, he said, "Buddy, we're in trouble. We don't have time to explain so much now. What you need to do is immediately arrange for people to contact all the newspapers. In today's evening papers, there must be articles about Brosnan purposely claiming that he didn't know about MGM's pay conditions in order to salvage the contract. The more, the better. Do you understand? That's all. I have to rush to the airport now. Also, watch over him, feed him, coax him, and buy as much time as possible." Chapter 901. Eric ended the call with Amy Pascal at noon and flew to San Francisco in the afternoon. In addition to visiting the Fireflyer assembly plant, Eric was most concerned about the research and development progress of several products in Firefly Electronics' plan. For any high-tech company, product marketing was important, but technology and patent reserves were the foundation of a high-tech company's ultimate survival. Therefore, Eric specifically asked Victor Mike Nelly to introduce the research and development results of Firefly Electronics in the past few months. Although the first-generation Fireflyer player was quite popular, there were still many areas that could be improved in terms of battery durability, storage capacity, audio decoding, and so on. The reason why Eric had always let Victor Mike Nelly, who was mainly in charge of technology research and development, be the CEO of Firefly Electronics was also to subtly express his fundamental attitude towards Firefly Electronics' business strategy. It was already 7 o'clock in the evening when they returned to Los Angeles. Eric took Kelly off the plane and just left Santa Monica Airport in a car. He planned to take Kelly home first before returning to the Pointy Corner Manor when the phone in his pocket rang. Kelly sat next to Eric and listened to him chat with the other party for a while before hanging up. She asked, "Is it Eric or MGM?" Eric put away his phone and nodded. Pierre Truck refused to leave and is still wasting time in Century City. He said he must see me today. Why don't we go over and take a look? I can go there myself. I'll take you home first. After sending Kelly back to her residence in the North District of Santa Monica, Eric ordered the driver to turn around and head to the MGM headquarters in Century City. The MGM headquarters was a building shrouded in tempered glass. It was located on a street not far from the intersection of Santa Monica Boulevard and Wilshire Boulevard in Century City. After circling Santa Monica, Eric took a car to Century City. The sky was already dark and the shops on both sides of the street began to light up with colorful lights. As soon as the car turned into the street where the MGM headquarters was located, Eric heard a faint noise. Looking out through the front window, he saw a crowd holding all kinds of slogans and shouting something in front of the MGM building. It almost completely blocked the entire street. The driver automatically slowed down the car and turned to look at Eric questioningly. Eric stared at the crowd for a few seconds and sneered. Real fans would usually only come over during working hours to express their wishes. Now that it was obviously after work hours, according to common sense, most of the employees at MGM headquarters had already gone home after work. Who were they protesting for at this time? Did some people think that he would sell the secret agent cinematic universe just because the fans were unhappy, just like in The Matrix? Retracting his gaze, Eric instructed, "Don't worry about them. Just drive into the underground parking lot." In front of the building, the crowd noticed a black car turning into the street and consciously made way for it. However, the media reporters who had been waiting there noticed the eye-catching Rolls-Royce logo in front of the car. They keenly realized something and gathered around. Some people even boldly stood in front of the car and raised their cameras, trying to confirm the identity of the passenger in the car through the front window. However, they were quickly pulled away by the security guards who rushed out from inside the building. The Rolls-Royce smoothly drove into the side alley of the building and into the underground parking lot. Eric took the elevator to the top floor of the office building. He hugged the girl who came out to greet him, and nodded at Amy Pascal. Without saying anything, he went straight to a conference room and pushed the door open to walk in. In the empty conference room, there was only a middle-aged man who had already stood up. He was about 50 years old, wearing a black suit and rimless glasses. He looked gentle and elegant. "It must be Pierre Telek. Have a seat, Mr. Telek." Eric did not intend to greet him, nor did he deliberately walk to the head of the conference table. He casually pulled out a chair and sat down. Looking at him, he said, "So, you wanted to see me?" Although he was also in a high position in Vivendi Group, Pierre Telek still felt a faint sense of oppression when facing Eric. The ignorant were fearless. On the other hand, after being in the workplace for many years, Pierre Telek could better understand how much power this young man had in his hands. However, thinking of the instructions from the higher-ups of Vivendi and Richard Lovett's promise, Pierre Telek tried hard to maintain his imposing manner. He sat down calmly and said, "Yes, Mr. Williams, I think we should talk." Eric looked at him and said calmly, "And then?" Pierre Telek looked at Drew and Amy, who sat down next to Eric. He straightened his body and said in a serious tone, "Mr. Williams, we are very grateful for the changes you have brought to MGM, but we also hope that you will not continue to interfere with the management of MGM. For MGM, you are just an outsider after all. As the second largest shareholder of MGM, we ask the management to immediately retract the decision to replace Pierce Brosnan. This will only destroy the entire Agent movie universe. Although we will never deny that you were the one who built the Agent movie universe, we will not allow you to destroy it." Eric tapped his fingers on the smooth conference table and nodded slightly. "Continue. Since you are here, does Vivendi have any other opinions on MGM's management?" Pierre Telek felt that Eric was putting on an act, but he did not back down. He continued, "Of course, Vivendi does not approve of MGM's continuous purchase of Entertainment TV stations, a one-time investment of $300 million to launch the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the acquisition of shares of Rainbow Media. This company has just recovered. In order to complete these plans, they issued a large number of corporate bonds. It is very likely that MGM will be dragged into the mire of debt again. We hope that the management can gradually realize these plans with a more stable plan." Eric waited for a moment to make sure that Pierre Telek had finished speaking. He nodded again and said, "Well, in that case, Mr. Telek, I will tell you how to solve this matter. First of all, as the second largest shareholder of MGM, Vivendi only has 16% of the voting rights. Even if the other European shareholders stand on Vivendi's side, you only have 31% of the voting rights. This is not enough to decide anything. So, you have three choices. First, find a way to become the controlling shareholder of MGM. Then you can replace the company's board of directors and management. You can implement any decision you want. Second, be the second largest shareholder and accept all the decisions made by MGM's board of directors and management. Third, if you can't stand being ignored, you can choose to sell your MGM shares. I can arrange funds to take over your shares at any time. So, are there any other questions?" Pierre Telek already had the urge to flip the table when Eric spoke halfway. He felt that Eric was completely playing with him. He forced himself to endure until Eric finished speaking. Pierre Telek slowly said, "Mr. Williams, are you playing with me?" "Oh." Eric seemed to suddenly remember something. He patted his forehead and said, "I almost forgot, I'm just an outsider. So, if you want to hear it, I can ask Drew or Amy to repeat what I just said. They should be considered insiders, right? Pierre Telek turned to look at the girl and Amy. Miss Bellymore, Miss Pascal, are you really willing to let Williams destroy everything? Amy's expression was a bit hesitant. She turned to look at the two people next to her and noticed Eric smiling at her. Her heart trembled and she looked away. She made up her mind and said to Pierre Telek, Mr. Telek, Eric's decision is the management's decision. If you think it's necessary, we can call the board of directors to vote. The 4 independent directors of MGM were all selected under Eric's instructions. Pierre Telek didn't need to think to know which side they would stand on. Pierre Telek realized that he was destined to return empty-handed. He clenched his fists on the table and didn't know what to say. Eric didn't want to continue wasting time with Pierre Telek. He patted the girl next to him and said, Let's go. You haven't had dinner yet, right? The girl came over like a kitten. She held onto Eric's arm and stood up with him. Amy, you entertain Mr. Telek, Eric said to Amy Pascal. He turned to look at Pierre Telek. The smile on his face didn't change. He just restrained his expression and said coldly, Speaking of which, Mr. Telek, what you just said is very reasonable. MGM should be more stable. So, Firefly will invest in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. MGM only needs to be responsible for the distribution. Pierre Telek was still in a daze, but Amy looked over in surprise. In fact, Amy also felt that investing $300 million in the Lord of the Rings trilogy was too risky. She had hoped that Firefly would participate in the investment. However, she didn't expect that Eric would suddenly take away the entire project and only leave MGM with the distribution rights. However, after noticing that Eric glanced at her again, Amy suddenly realized that Eric might have done this to warn her. Perhaps, his performance today was indeed too overcautious and indecisive. Even though he didn't have any shares in MGM, the entire Hollywood knew that this big film company had always been under Eric's control. Amy was also the head of one of the 7 major companies. She knew that she had far more autonomy from Eric than Shirley Lansing of Paramount. This was originally a sign of Eric's trust in her. However, if she continued to worry about losing Brosnan because of the 007 series, she would soon lose Eric's trust. After secretly reflecting on herself, Amy no longer hesitated. She got up and sent Eric and Drew off. She then turned to Pierre Telek, who was still sitting on the other side of the conference table, and said, Mr. Telek, it's a bit late. Do you need me to arrange a car to take you to the hotel? When Pierre came back to his senses, he realized that Eric and Drew had already left. He suddenly had some expectations and said to Amy, Ms. Pascal, how about we have dinner together and talk? Amy politely shook her head and didn't find any excuses. She just refused. Sorry, Mr. Telek. If you don't need a car, I'll take you downstairs. Chapter 902. When they arrived at the parking lot, Eric sent his driver and bodyguards away. He and the girl got into her Land Rover and left the MGM headquarters together. After discussing where to eat next, the girl came over softly. Eric, how about I transfer the MGM shares back to you? Eric chuckled and said, The shares in your hands are estimated to cost $4 billion. I can't afford it. I've already consulted a lawyer. There's a way to do it without spending a single cent. Eric didn't wait for the girl to continue. He reached out and hugged her. The girl intimately sat on Eric's lap and looked at him with sparkling eyes. Eric held the girl's baby face and said seriously, Drew, can I trust you? Yes, yes, yes. The girl nodded repeatedly. Actually, it's very difficult to find someone you can entrust everything to in your life. Most people will never meet someone like that. Eric said seriously. He leaned over and kissed the girl's little mouth. I'm lucky to have met someone like that. So, help me look after MGM. Don't worry about what others think, and don't always let me make the decision. If anyone dares to have any ideas, just pick up the bottle and hit them on the head like you used to. Yes, yes. The girl nodded and hummed a few times. Her body seemed to soften a little. She was completely attached to Eric. Her little hands were restlessly rubbing Eric. She whispered, "Eric, I suddenly want to do it in the car." Eric hugged the girl's waist. He felt like he was hugging a kitten that was suddenly aroused. He said, "Well, we seem to be talking about business. Also, I quite like this car. Don't dirty it. You know, my obsession with cleanliness seems to be getting worse." The girl giggled but ignored him. She reached out and pulled Eric's shirt. She also instructed the twins to drive the car to the nearby 405 highway. Century City, CAA headquarters. Richard Lovett had been anxiously waiting for news from Pierre Truck, which was the last chance to make Eric change his mind. In addition to the celebrity agency business, Michael Ovitz had been expanding CAA's business since the 1980s. CAA had been in charge of advertising for many large companies. Similar to the packaging of film and television contracts, these advertising projects generally provided one-stop services such as finding a spokesperson for the company's products, contacting advertising companies, and producing advertisements. Pierre Truck's Harvest Group happened to be one of the largest advertising and media companies in the world. Richard Lovett stopped Pierre Telek at the Los Angeles International Airport and promised him a cooperation. He hoped that Pierre Telek could help persuade MGM to change their decision. Pierre Telek had originally come to stop MGM from replacing Brosnan, but he didn't expect to receive such an unexpected reward. Naturally, the two sides hit it off. She couldn't help but look at her watch again. It was almost 8:00. Just as Richard Lovett was considering whether he should take the initiative to call and ask, his phone finally rang. Richard Lovett picked it up without hesitation. He heard the other party's voice clearly and went straight to the point. "Pierre, what's the result?" Richard Lovett forced himself to wait for the other party to finish speaking. His last glimmer of hope was shattered. He subconsciously made a gesture of throwing a grenade, but in the end, he didn't throw the brand-new phone in his hand. Richard Lovett slowly retracted his arm and held the phone in his palm. He put his hands together and stood behind his desk. He quickly thought about how to deal with Pierce Brosnan. The office door was knocked twice, and David O'Connor pushed the door open. When he saw Richard Lovett's posture, he paused and said, "Richard, we probably can't stop him. Pierre said that if there's no news, he plans to go back today. How's it going on your end?" Richard Lovett slowly exhaled, shook his head, and said, "I'll talk to Pierre in person later." David O'Connor immediately understood the outcome of the matter. He didn't say anything else, nodded, and left. After spending a day at the CAA headquarters, Pierce Brosnan gradually realized something as he looked at the night sky outside the window. After David O'Connor left, he looked at the public relations manager, Sarah Lindolt, who had been by his side the whole time, and asked, "Sarah, should I call Pascal or Williams personally?" Sarah Lindolt looked at her client with some pity in her heart, who had been kept in the dark all this time. If she really wanted to make this call, this morning would be the best time. Now, Richard Lovett must have arranged everything. Even if she made the call, it would be useless. Although she was by Brosnan's side, she had actually been in contact with the outside world. Judging from the current situation, it was likely that things were worse than she had imagined. Perhaps she would also lose this client. Fortunately, David O'Connor had already promised to introduce her to 4 clients of the same level as Brosnan. Even if she lost Brosnan, it wouldn't be too much of a pity. With the recording, David O'Connor definitely wouldn't dare to go back on his word. Just as she was about to comfort Brosnan, the office door was pushed open. Richard Lovett walked in with a serious expression. He patted Brosnan's shoulder and asked him to sit down. He pulled out a chair and sat across from Brosnan. "Pierre, I did my best. MGM has agreed to sign a new contract with you." Before Brosnan could rejoice, he realized that Richard Lovett was talking about a new contract, not a new negotiation. "Richard, you mean the same conditions as yesterday?" Brosnan suddenly realized that until now, he still didn't know what kind of remuneration Eric had offered him yesterday. Yesterday, Rick Kotzman hadn't told him the details. This morning, when he found out that he was suddenly fired from the 007 crew, His first reaction when he rushed to CAA's headquarters was to punch Rick Kotzman in the face. Naturally, the two of them didn't have any communication. Although he had already seen the announcement made by MGM on Yahoo's homepage, this kind of announcement definitely didn't mention the exact terms of his remuneration with MGM. It only revealed the general concept of a multi-billion-dollar package contract. Richard Lovett shook his head and said, "No, Pierre. MGM's current conditions are 2007 series at $20 million each, 2 Agent Movie Universe series at $10 million each, and 4 package contracts for a total of $60 million. After hearing this, Brosnan's expression changed. A few days ago, Rick Kotzman had analyzed for him that with the current momentum of the box office of Casino Royale, he could at least get $40 million each for the sequels. Now, the total of $60 million for the 4 movies was only $15 million on average, less than half of the original estimate. The contract that was supposed to be worth $160 million had now become $60 million. Brosnan naturally blamed all of this on Rick Kotzman and CAA. At the same time, he realized that he must have completely lost any bargaining power. Suppressing the anger in his heart, Brosnan asked patiently, "Didn't the Yahoo announcement say $100 million? Why is it so much less?" Richard Lovett shook his head and explained patiently, "There was no such thing as a $100 million contract. MGM was just exaggerating. Yesterday, Williams offered $70 million for the 4 movies and a similar sharing plan. You know, Williams is a stubborn bastard. We rejected him once. Now that we want to sign a new contract, he will definitely lower your remuneration. So, the sharing plan was cancelled. He only—" "No, that's not right." Before Richard Lovett could finish, Brosnan couldn't hold it in anymore. He stood up and pointed at Richard Lovett. "It's not we, it's you. It's you bastards who rejected the MGM contract on your own accord. That's why we're in this situation now. It's all you bastards who ruined everything." Richard Lovett followed Brosnan and stood up. Still in a good mood, he said, "Pierre, calm down." "Calm down? Why the F***ck should I calm down?" Brosnan glared at Richard Lovett and raised his voice again. At the same time, he grabbed the chair behind him and smashed it against the window not far away. The hard-tempered glass did not shatter, but some of the decorations on the windowsill fell with the chair, making a crackling sound. "This is all your fault. You have to give me an explanation. Otherwise, I will expose everything you bastards have done to the media." Although Brosnan was showing signs of exploding, Richard Lovett tried his best not to fall out with him. He continued to comfort him. "Pierre, don't be like this. I admit that we may have done some things wrong, but this won't help. You know, MGM only gave us 1 night. If you still reject the contract tomorrow morning, it means that you will completely lose the role. Think about it, $60 million. How many stars in Hollywood can earn $60 million in their lifetime? 100 million. This money should have been at least 100 million, but you lost 40 million. There was never 100 million, 70 million. Williams claimed a few years ago that he would suppress the pay of Hollywood stars. That's what he's doing now. I used almost all of CAA's connections today to make him give up on the decision to replace you. It's only $10 million less. No matter what, I won't sign such a contract. Also, I will announce what CAA did tomorrow. Just wait for your reputation to be ruined." After being scolded, Richard Lovett was also a little angry. He said loudly, "Be realistic, Pierre. If you give up on Bond, do you think anyone will be willing to spend $20 million to hire you? No, that's absolutely impossible. Your image has already been set. It will be difficult for the audience to accept your role outside of 007. Also, you know The Lion King 2, right? That animated film originally had the same global box office potential as Finding Nemo, but because of Firefly and Fox's joint boycott, its box office was only half of Finding Nemo. So, what's more, considering the pressure from Firefly, most film companies won't even invite you to act in movies. Your career in Hollywood is basically over. Even if I'm done, I'll drag CAA down with me. I'll sue you." Ha, sue us? Do you know what's in the newspapers now? Pierce Brosnan deliberately claimed to know nothing about MGM's pay conditions in order to save 007's contract. Everyone now thinks that you are deliberately pretending to be kept in the dark. If you sue again, you will only be treated as a flustered and exasperated joke. Brosnan paused for a moment, before he suddenly grabbed Richard Lovett's collar and pressed him against the wall. You did it, didn't you? You must have done it. Let go, you lunatic. Although Richard Lovett was pressed against the wall, he still looked righteous. He waved his arms and shouted, "In order to help you get the contract back, I almost knelt down in front of all the people in Los Angeles. Do you think I have time for such boring things? This is just MGM showing off to you." Richard Lovett shouted himself hoarse with an expression of grievance that could not be concealed. Brosnan stared at him for a few seconds and gradually lowered his raised fist. However, he was unwilling to let go of him just like that. The two men were in a stalemate for a moment before Sarah Lint, who had been carefully hiding at the side, suggested, "Richard, how about this? Didn't MGM only lower the salary by $10 million? Maybe CAA can voluntarily give up the 10% commission in this contract to make up for Pierre's loss." Richard Lovett, whose collar was still tightly gripped, panted heavily. He glanced at Brosnan, his eyes still filled with unwillingness. After a while he said, "Okay, I agree." Brosnan finally let go of Richard Lovett's collar. However, he still said coldly, "You shouldn't have taken a single cent, Sarah, let's go." With that, Brosnan left the office without looking back. Sarah Lindell waved triumphantly at Richard Lovett, then hurried out after him. B*TCH. Looking at Sarah Lint's leaving figure, Richard Lovett cursed fiercely. He slid down the wall and sat on the floor. Pulling open his collar, he pulled off the crooked tie and threw it aside, heaving a sigh of relief. A moment later, David O'Connor walked in. He looked at Richard Lovett, who was sitting at the foot of the wall. He walked over and squatted down in front of him. He took out a cigarette from the pack in his pocket and lit it for him. He then asked, "Done?" Richard Lovett smoked half of the cigarette in one breath and nodded. He glanced at the mess by the window and suddenly cursed in a low voice, "Damn Hollywood." Chapter 903. Just as Richard Lovett had predicted, MGM's stock price fell 6.8% on Tuesday after the news of Brosnan's replacement. Since MGM did not take any remedial measures, the market value of MGM had fallen from its peak of $12.3 billion to $11.5 billion by the end of the day. Early Wednesday morning, when the major newspapers in North America were discussing whether MGM's stock price would fall again today, the reporters who had been waiting at the MGM headquarters in Century City suddenly broke the news. At around 9:20 a.m. local time in Los Angeles, Pierce Brosnan, who played James Bond, suddenly appeared in Century City and rushed into the MGM headquarters under the escort of a group of assistants and bodyguards. The relevant photos appeared on the Yahoo portal homepage almost at the same time. Under such circumstances, even a fool could guess that there was a major turnaround in Brosnan's replacement. Although MGM still did not announce any news to the public, on the New York Stock Exchange on the East Coast, MGM's stock price, which had fallen again since the opening of the day, suddenly rose rapidly. In just half an hour, MGM's market value returned to $12 billion. Then, at 10 o'clock, MGM finally released another announcement through the Yahoo portal, but the content had nothing to do with the Agent cinematic universe that the media and fans were paying close attention to. The announcement stated that in order to alleviate cash flow and minimize investment risks, MGM had decided to transfer the production rights of the Lord of the Rings trilogy to Firefly Pictures. The company only retained the global distribution rights of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. As soon as the news came out, MGM's rapidly rising stock price suddenly stopped and even showed a short arc of decline. The rumor that MGM was going to produce the Lord of the Rings trilogy in one go had not stopped for the past 2 years. Recently, there had been frequent rumors in the industry that the project had entered the preliminary stage of substantial preparation. Rookie director, $300 million budget, nameless producer, huge risk, These words that were very unfavorable for the entire project often appeared in the analysis articles of major media outlets. Many media outlets also speculated that if Eric Williams, who controlled MGM behind the scenes, was really optimistic about the project, he would definitely let Firefly Pictures participate in the investment. But if Firefly did not participate at all, then the project was likely to be a gamble that even Eric himself was not sure about. Therefore, the sudden announcement caught everyone off guard. Firefly did not choose to participate in the production of The Lord of the Rings trilogy. Instead, she took over the entire project. In the end, MGM could only get about 15% of the worldwide box office of the Lord of the Rings series. The lucrative videotape/DVD distribution, TV broadcast rights, and peripheral products obviously had nothing to do with MGM. Until the final dust settled, even the most well-informed media couldn't straighten out the various power struggles that happened inside and outside MGM in the past few days. However, this did not prevent them from speculating about the meaning of this announcement. Very quickly, the boldest and most serious guess was published and quickly appeared on Yahoo's trending list. MGM and Williams have parted ways. After MGM announced Brosnan's replacement yesterday, the inside story was quickly leaked. The person who made the decision was Eric Williams himself. After that, MGM's share price fell by 6.8%. MGM's European shareholder spokesperson, Pierre Telek, rushed from New York to Los Angeles to contact MGM's management. Then, following this train of thought, MGM's European shareholders would definitely not tolerate the impact of Brosnan's replacement on MGM's share price. Although the outside world speculated that Drew Barrymore, who held the largest proportion of MGM shares, was Eric Williams' puppet, there was no substantial evidence to prove this. Eric Williams was involved with MGM shares. He only indirectly controlled 8.4% of MGM shares through the Ltd Group. If Drew Barrymore and MGM senior management were dissatisfied with Eric Williams' decision, and if Pierre Telek represented the European shareholders' support, it was not impossible for the major shareholders to unite and fall out with Williams and completely break free from his control. Then this morning, Brosnan stepped into MGM's headquarters again, and MGM gave up on the risky The Lord of the Rings trilogy. All these signs seemed to go against Eric Williams' will. With this speculation, it was completely reasonable that MGM and Eric Williams would break off completely and go their separate ways. Due to the various speculations caused by MGM's transfer of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the share price fluctuated in a very unstable state for the next hour. As the core of the agent movie universe, Pierce Brosnan was undoubtedly important. This could be seen from the huge drop in MGM's share price yesterday. However, if the company's investors were asked to choose between Eric Williams and Pierce Brosnan, most people would not hesitate too much. Everyone knew that MGM's recovery in recent years was entirely due to Eric Williams alone. The projects that had brought huge profits to MGM in recent years, including the Agent Movie Universe series, the Night at the Museum series, the Resident Evil series, and so on, were all led by Eric. Perhaps these projects had entered a stable period of profit, but investors with a little bit of rationality would not think that Eric Williams was no longer important. After all, although it had begun to recover, MGM was still the weakest of the 7 major film companies. The profitability that supported the company's development was still limited to the traditional film business. It was far less deep-rooted than the other major media companies that had integrated into large media groups. If they completely lost the support of the Firefly Group, or even if they were suppressed by the Firefly Group after the two sides fell out, the impact on MGM would be countless times more serious than if they lost Pierce Brosnan. Therefore, when the news of MGM and Eric's complete break gradually spread and was accepted by more and more people, the situation suddenly changed. At around 11 o'clock in the morning, the New York Stock Exchange on the East Coast was only an hour and a half away from the close of the day. But in this short hour and a half, MGM's stock price curve was like a shot put under the gravitational force of gravity. Under the rapid rotation, when the closing time came, MGM's stock price finally stopped at $22.82. Not only did it completely offset the boost brought by Pierce Brosnan's re-entry into MGM's headquarters, but it also fell by a shocking 13.7% compared to the opening price of $26.45. the overall market value of MGM fell back to the $10 billion range, leaving only $9.92 billion. After tossing and turning all night, he occasionally thought that at worst, he would just break up with MGM. But when the sky brightened, Pierce Brosnan finally decided to accept MGM's terms of remuneration from his newly acquired Beverly Hills mansion overlooking Los Angeles in the morning. Richard Lovett was actually right. If he lost 007, everything that he had worked hard for over 10 years in Hollywood, fame, glory, money, would all vanish. Furthermore, because he had completely fallen out with them, he might even be blacklisted by Firefly, MGM, and even Fox. Then, he would basically be unable to continue to establish himself in Hollywood. However, although they decided to compromise on the remuneration, both Brosnan himself and Richard Lovett, who personally came to take charge of the negotiations, showed an attitude of haggling over every detail, such as personal treatment on set, whether to cooperate with MGM for advertising, the extent of dangerous actions during filming, and other detailed terms, such as personal treatment on set, whether to cooperate with MGM for advertising, and the extent of dangerous actions during filming, etc. MGM did not argue over details such as treatment on set, but they did not back down on terms that might affect the quality of the film. The two sides went back and forth in the MGM conference room all day, and the contract was finally finalized when night fell. During this period, the news of MGM's stock price falling again naturally could not be hidden from anyone present, and it was inevitable that there would be a commotion within the company. After understanding the details of the matter, Drew, who was sitting at the conference table and personally participating in the negotiations, had the attitude of allowing the stock price to fall, and even stopped Amy from releasing some clarification information. This was not only because she knew better than anyone that the external rumors were completely false, but as long as there was an appropriate clarification, MGM's stock price would definitely rise again. Moreover, the girl was even happy to see this situation. Just a rumor that Eric might break with MGM could cause MGM's stock price to fall, and this also allowed many people who had different thoughts to completely see Eric's influence and importance to MGM. Last night, after confiding in Eric, the girl decided to go all out to help Eric hold MGM in the palm of his hand, but she did not intend to give the impression that Eric's influence on MGM would be reduced because of this. However, the girl also knew the principle of 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 when to stop. She allowed MGM's stock price to go up and down like a roller coaster all day, and some people were sufficiently stimulated. That night, MGM began to take action to recover the decline of the stock price. After officially signing the contract with Brosnan, MGM announced the news on the Yahoo portal that night. Once the news came out, the 4 films were packed together for $60 million. Once the news came out, it once again shocked everyone. Obviously, this was not because the average salary of $15 million per film was too high, but because it was too low. For most Hollywood stars, an average salary of $15 million per film might be unattainable. However, compared to the expected box office of Casino Royale, and the huge income that the entire agent movie universe would bring to MGM, as the core lead, Brosnan's $60 million package contract for 4 films was a complete cabbage price. Before this, many media outlets had speculated that Pierce Brosnan's next contract with MGM would have a salary of no less than $60 million per film. After the initial shock, some people began to realize that, if the contract was real, MGM had won the pay dispute with Pierce Brosnan, and it was a massive, insane victory. In that case, would Eric Williams, who had led the charge to suppress Brosnan's salary and even replaced him, really break up with MGM completely, as most media outlets had speculated? After all, without Eric Williams's strong insistence, MGM might not have been able to get Brosnan to sign a 4-film contract, let alone $60 million, even if it was $160 million. Moreover, this victory had a very positive impact on the overall development of the next stage of MGM's agent movie universe. Whether it was the Breaking Girls trio or Kevin Costner of Mission Impossible, when negotiating with MGM, they would not be able to appear confident. Amidst the chaotic comments and speculation, the next day, MGM gave the media and the public an answer in another way. MGM was about to launch a new racing movie series, The Fast and the Furious. The movie would be written and produced by Eric himself. At the same time, if the movie received a good market response, MGM would incorporate this series into the Agent movie universe in the future. MGM released this news through Yahoo at 9 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time. While the market was still processing the information contained in this news, at 9:30 Eastern Time, just before the New York Stock Exchange opened, the CEO of Vivendi's Harvest Group in the United States, Pierre Truck, announced to the public that due to work reasons, he would be resigning from the board of directors of MGM. The successor would be jointly elected by the management of MGM and the major shareholders. At this time, even the slowest people realized that Eric had not lost control of MGM from the beginning to the end. Not only did he forcefully dominate the salary negotiations between MGM and Brosnan, but he also mercilessly expelled Pierre Truck, the spokesperson of the European shareholders who had tried to interfere with MGM's management, from the MGM board of directors. Although they still did not quite understand why Eric transferred the huge risk of the Lord of the Rings trilogy to Firefly Pictures, this did not prevent the capital market from rekindling their confidence in MGM. After all, investors always valued profits the most. Although Eric's recent aggressive actions caused turbulence in MGM, there was no doubt that these measures were undoubtedly very beneficial to MGM's development. Therefore, on Thursday, MGM's stock price rebounded strongly to a high of $27, and its market value reached $11.74 billion. Then, on Friday, due to the week of news about Pierce Brosnan's possible replacement, the popularity of Casino Royale rose again. A large number of movie fans went to the cinema to remember Pierce Brosnan, who was about to leave. In the end, in the third week of its release, the box office of Casino Royale narrowed again to only 32%, earning $52.73 million. The three-week total box office had reached $247 million. Although it did not exceed the $263 million box office of Finding Nemo in the fifth week of its release. However, compared to the same period of release of Finding Nemo, the box office of Casino Royale in the third week was $8 million higher. In this way, the North American box office of Casino Royale was bound to exceed Finding Nemo. Some analysts even raised the final estimate of the North American box office of Casino Royale to $370 million, and the industry generally expected the North American box office of Finding Nemo to be within $330 million. After the box office data was released, there was further good news along with the various good news from yesterday. It caused MGM's stock price to break through the $30 mark on Friday and finally stopped at $30.37. Based on MGM's total share capital of 435 million shares, the market value of MGM had reached $13.2 billion by the end of the week. Chapter 904. Early on Saturday morning, Michael Eisner drove to Burbank Universal Studios. After more than 3 months of preparation, the Titanic theme exhibition hall in Firefly Cineplex officially opened today. In some interviews, senior executives of the Firefly Group repeatedly understated that this was just a test of the theme park project by Firefly Studios, and even more like an image project for the company. But Universal did not dare to take it lightly. Universal Studios, which was run by Universal Pictures Group, originally did not have a strong competitive relationship with Disneyland, which now belonged to Firefly. One was mainly for adult tourists, while the other was for children's dreamland. But now, the opening of the Titanic theme exhibition hall indicated that Firefly Group had officially begun to develop a theme park project for adult tourists over the age of 18. Although Universal Studios had a deep heritage of more than 30 years, in terms of theme park operations, Firefly Group, which took Disney as its own, was obviously not inferior to Universal. What's more, in recent years, Firefly Group had continuously developed a large number of popular movies, which would also provide a rich theme for its development of the Universal Studios Park project. In this regard, Universal Pictures was completely incomparable to the other party. According to the information obtained in advance, as early as a week ago, the limited 20,000 tickets for the Titanic theme exhibition hall had been sold out on the opening day, and the tickets for the following week were basically sold out. Obviously, this project had already shown signs of being popular before it opened for business. Although with the gradual decline of Titanic worldwide, the popularity of the film would slowly cool down. In a few months, if Firefly Studios only relied on the Titanic theme exhibition hall, it would be considered good if the number of visitors per day could reach 2,000 or 3,000. However, as long as the senior management of Firefly Group was not stupid, they would definitely take advantage of the success of the Titanic theme exhibition to expand other movie-themed projects to maintain the popularity of Firefly Studios. At that time, Firefly Studios would also gradually develop into a direct competitor to Universal Studios in terms of customers. Michael Eisner took the vice president of the group who was in charge of the operation of the theme park and walked around the park. He also asked about the ticket booking situation for the next few days. When the park officially opened at 8:30 p.m., he looked at the tourists pouring into the cinema and relaxed a little. However, he then gathered the management of the theme park and held an impromptu meeting on the development of new projects in the studio to deal with the competition from Firefly Studios. This went on until noon, when the CEO of the parent company, Seagram Group, Edgar Bronfman, called. Even if the movie could get $300 million globally, it would not be as good as the North American box office of Casino Royale, let alone the global box office of Casino Royale. Casino Royale had only been released for 3 weeks, and the North American box office had reached $247 million. At the same time, the overseas box office performance of the movie was even stronger. In the first week, Casino Royale opened in 36 countries at the same time, and it won $136 million at the overseas box office. The overseas box office dropped only 27% the next week, and the movie earned $28 million. The overseas box office also reached $5 million in the last week. In 3 weeks, Casino Royale earned $303 million in the overseas market. The movie was expected to be released at the same time in North America, and the overseas box office of Casino Royale could easily reach more than $450 million. Although the release of Casino Royale was synchronized in many countries, many overseas countries deliberately scheduled Casino Royale after the summer break to protect their own film market. That meant that Casino Royale would be released on a larger scale after September. By then, Casino Royale could easily earn another $200 to $300 million at the overseas box office. This meant that before the end of the year, Casino Royale could break the $1 billion global box office mark. It would become the second movie in Eric Williams' career to break the $1 billion global box office mark. $1 billion. In comparison, Air Force One was not worth mentioning at all. Michael Eisner took a sip of the soda water that the waiter brought over. He then threw away these depressing thoughts and said to Edgar Bronfman, "Ed, do you still remember the Scorpion King that we are currently working on? The special effects movie that was derived from the Mummy series?" "Of course." Edgar Bronfman nodded and said, "Why, is there a problem?" "No." Michael Eisner shook his head and said, "I've been thinking about this for the past few weeks. Since MGM can make an agent universe, maybe we can make a mummy universe around Egyptian mythology?" Edgar Bronfman paused for a second and immediately nodded. He said, "That's a good idea, why not? By the way, do you have a detailed plan now?" "I haven't figured it out yet, but yeah, it's almost there." Michael Eisner was a little vague. In fact, he already had a plan in mind, but it wasn't that simple to implement. The main problem was still the main actors. After the success of the 2 consecutive Mummy series, all the actors asked for a significant increase in their pay. The 2 main actors and actresses had already discussed it and asked for a high price of $20 million plus a share of the profits. Universal definitely couldn't afford it. Therefore, the salary negotiations for the 3rd film had been in a deadlock. The Mummy series was the only project that Universal had been able to bring in stable and generous profits in recent years. Michael Eisner believed that he definitely did not have the confidence that Eric had when it came to breaking up with Pierce Brosnan. Therefore, this matter had dragged on until now and had not been resolved. If the lead actors could not resolve it, the so-called Mummy universe would definitely be out of the question. Edgar Bronfman didn't realize the problem Michael Eisner was facing. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that his plan was feasible, so he said, "How about this? I happen to be in Los Angeles for a while, so we can take some time to discuss it together. Michael Eisner nodded and asked curiously, "You're staying in Los Angeles for a while. Is there something important?" "Yeah, I just met with Doug Morris this morning. Speaking of which, maybe you can give me some advice on this matter." Doug Morris was the CEO of Universal Records, and Michael Eisner often dealt with him. He asked, "About the record company?" "It's like this." Edgar Bronfman was just about to speak when the waiter served their lunch. He paused for a moment and waited for the waiter to leave before continuing, "I plan to continue to increase the proportion of Seagram's media business. Coincidentally, there's news from Europe that Philips is interested in selling Polygram records. I think this may be a good opportunity to further expand Seagram's record business." Michael Eisner, who had already picked up his utensils and was about to eat, frowned slightly when he heard Edgar Bronfman say this. He put down his utensils and said seriously, "Ed, I don't think this is a good idea. You must know about the Fireflyer player from Firefly Electronics, right? Now everyone is talking about the possibility that online digital music may impact physical records. If this trend is true, buying Polygram now is equivalent to taking over a big burden at a high price." "I don't think so." Edgar Bronfman shook his head and said with a smile, "Michael, in this regard, I should be considered to know more than you. In the past few decades, from vinyl records to cassette players, and then to CD records a few years ago, although there were always people who said that the new media might affect record sales, in fact, this situation has never happened. The record industry as a whole is still thriving. The reason why there are so many rumors this time is actually very simple. It's just that the Japanese electronics manufacturers are worried that the Fireflyer player will affect their market position in the traditional portable player field, so they created so many alarmist remarks." Michael Eisner didn't know much about the record industry. Listening to Edgar Bronfman's clear and logical explanation, he understood that he had actually made up his mind. He originally didn't intend to persuade him, but after thinking about it, he said, "I think that if Polygram wants to find a buyer, Firefly Group should be more suitable. They want to promote the Fireflyer player, and they definitely can't do it without enough music copyrights. So, Ed, maybe you can wait a little longer. If Firefly Group isn't interested in this matter at all, Seagram better be careful." Speaking of this, Edgar Bronfman deliberately looked around, lowered his voice, and said, "I just happened to hear some news. Williams went to the UK last time and had already contacted Polygram. Although there is no news yet, you should also know that if there is really any news in the media, then Firefly must have almost reached an agreement with Philips, and there won't be a chance for us to make a move." Michael Eisner was stunned, and asked in a cautious tone, "Ed, where did you get the news? Aren't you afraid that Polygram deliberately revealed it to you?" "Haha, don't worry, it wasn't easy for me to find out. The source of the news definitely has nothing to do with Polygram. What I need to do now is to reach an agreement with Philips in advance before Firefly officially makes a move." After Edgar Bronfman finished speaking, he smiled proudly. Michael Eisner smiled in agreement, and asked, "Then, how much does it cost to buy Polygram?" "Around $10 billion US, Edgar Bronfman said. "I plan to sell off the rest of the company's beverage business." "Alright, you definitely need to cooperate on your side, and then Seagram Group will issue another $5 billion US of bonds. That should be enough." The total scale of the Seagram Group was around $30 billion US. Due to continuous expansion in recent years, the media industry, including Universal Pictures and Universal Records, already accounted for more than 70% of the total market value of Seagram Group. If they bought Polygram, Seagram Group would probably completely transform into a media company. However, Michael Eisner realized that after buying Polygram, half of the entire Seagram Group's industry would be in the recording business. Now, they had to issue another $5 billion US of bonds, which would further increase the debt ratio of the Seagram Group. If the recording industry really went downhill with the rise of digital music as the media analyzed, Seagram Group would face a very bad situation in the future. Chapter 905. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the first day of business for the Titanic Exhibition Hall ended. According to preliminary statistics, in addition to the $100,000 income from the 20,000 tickets, the souvenir shops, restaurants, bars and other consumer items in the park also earned $570,000 on the first day. In other words, the entire theme exhibition hall earned $670,000 for the day. If this popularity could be maintained, the exhibition hall's annual operating income would exceed $200 million. Firefly had invested less than $15 million in the entire exhibition hall. Of course, it was unrealistic to expect the Titanic-themed exhibition hall to maintain this level of popularity. Because it was a single movie-themed project, the ticket price for the venue was only $5, less than 1/10 of the price of Universal Studios. However, with such a good start, it was only logical to continue to expand the scale of Firefly's theme park. As night fell, although the movie-related exhibition areas on the ship were closed, places such as restaurants and bars would be open until late at night. The ship's banquet hall would also host various parties in the future. In order to celebrate the opening of the Titanic theme exhibition hall, Firefly held a grand celebration party on the ship today. Eric originally didn't want to join in the fun, but he was dragged along by Wendy. The problem now is that the north of the studio is the Verona Canal, the south is the densely populated residential area, and the west is Lincoln Avenue. If the theme park wants to expand, it can only expand to the east. That way, it will be connected to the Titanic exhibition hall. However, the east has gradually developed into a residential area in recent years. If news of our expansion gets out, the residents in the east will definitely raise the price. This is not unprecedented. When Disney World was built in Orlando, they encountered this problem. At that time, due to the plan being leaked in advance, the price of the land was raised several times. On the top deck of the ship, Katzenberg and Eric leaned against the railing together, looking at the revelers around the ship and discussing the expansion of the studio. Eric turned and looked to the east. In the night, compared to the desolation when Firefly was first built, there were indeed large areas of lights there now. When they first bought the land under their feet, it was basically according to the price of a wasteland. In order to promote Firefly to be located in their own tax zone, Priavesta gave them a lot of discounts. But now, if Cineplex wanted to expand into the residential area in the east, it would definitely not be able to sell at the same price as before. Furthermore, considering Firefly Group's current strong capital strength, no one would let go of the opportunity to make a fortune. Retracting his gaze and continuing to lean on the railing, Eric pointed to the dock area west of Lincoln Avenue. "Jeffrey, what about over there?" Katzenberg looked in the direction Eric pointed and said, "I've also asked people to collect information over there. West of Lincoln Avenue to the seaside, there are about 160 hectares of vacant land. It's even larger than the movie theater. However, if they bought it for the development of a theme park, the Titanic exhibition hall and some other sightseeing projects planned to be opened in the studio would be divided into two by Lincoln Avenue. Moreover, even if we don't consider the dividing factor of Lincoln Avenue, the straight-line distance from the Titanic exhibition hall to the seaside beach is more than 4 kilometers. Tourists won't be willing to travel so far back and forth." Eric thought for a moment and said, "Jeffrey, first contact the Priavesta government to buy the land in the west and let the theme park team try to plan it. Even if it doesn't work, we can still build a large parking lot in the west. A theme park can't do without a spacious parking lot." Katzenberg nodded. Buying the 160 hectares of land in the west would not cause any financial pressure to Firefly Group. "Eric, what about the east? Let's go together. Buy as much as we can, but we can't be spendthrifts. If the residents ask for too much, then forget it." At this point, Eric added, "In addition, we can also get people to spread the false news that the theme park will be built in the west. That way, it should be easier to buy the land." In the crowded banquet hall of the big ship, Melanie Gleason had just left to get 2 cocktails when she saw 2 boys chatting with Carolyn. She quickened her pace and directly inserted herself between Carolyn and the 2 boys. She stared at them with a bit of shrewdness and said, "Hey, guys, my sister is only 12 years old. You'd better stay away from her." Although the 2 boys were a little dissatisfied, they did not dare to make trouble here. They looked at the petite girl who was like a doll with nostalgia and reluctantly walked away. Perhaps infected by the lively atmosphere around, Carolyn's face was a little rosy. She took the cocktail from Melanie's hand, but was a little dissatisfied. She said, "Melanie, I'm not that young. Didn't you say I was 14 years old last time? Little bastards these days are getting more and more daring. 14 years old is no longer useful." Melanie moved over and kissed Carolyn's little face in a roguish manner. Seeing the girl shrink her neck back, Melanie said with a smile, "Let's go. We'll walk around first. After that, we'll meet Mr. Boss that you've been thinking about day and night." "You're embarrassing me again," Carolyn protested. Looking around with regret, she said, "It's a pity that Rachel has returned to the UK. Otherwise, she would definitely come today. You should think about yourself first." Melanie said, "Do you really plan to stay by Eric's side?" I feel that this is a good opportunity," Carolyn said, her long eyelashes drooping down. Her tone was indescribably sad as she said, "Moreover, just like Peter, after working by Eric's side for a period of time, I'll probably have to go work somewhere else." Melanie sighed. She knew that this girl was actually very clear about a lot of things. Although Carolyn seemed to always have the appearance of a delicate little doll, and Melanie would always use the excuse that she was underage to help her stop people from hitting on her. However, in reality, she was already 26 years old this year. In the end, it was impossible for her to be the little girl who had just left the ivory tower. Reaching out, Melanie carefully hugged Carolyn in her arms and said, "That's it then. In any case, every girl who wants to grow up will have to meet a few bastards." Carolyn patted Melanie lightly and said, "You're teasing him with lines from Eric's movies again. He's not a bastard." "Yes, yes," Melanie echoed. Recalling some of the interesting things that Rachel had told her, she smiled and continued, "He's a bad guy." Carolyn immediately blushed and said, "You're so annoying. Rachel even told you this." Eric and Katzenberg talked about the expansion of the movie theater and entertained some of the more important guests. Noticing that Carolyn and Melanie had already arrived at the top deck, Eric waved for the girls to come over. Melanie pushed Carolyn, and the girl walked over alone and politely greeted, "Good evening, Eric." "You too." Eric smiled and looked at Carolyn's knee-length corset dress with a waist and praised, "You're really beautiful tonight." "Thank you." Carolyn nodded and looked at Eric lying on the railing in a relaxed manner. She took a step forward and stood beside Eric, looking at the night scene in the distance. After thinking about it for a few days, Eric completely made up his mind. Looking at Carolyn, who was standing beside him obediently, he was not in a hurry to get to the point. Instead, he casually chatted, "So, how have you been recently?" "Very good," Carolyn said. She instinctively wanted to stay by Eric's side for a while, so she took the initiative to find a topic and said, "My aunt came to Los Angeles to see me last week." Eric suddenly felt something flash in his mind. "Your aunt?" "Yes, it was the first time I saw her." "Eric, have you forgotten? When we met at Harvard that year, I showed you her photo." Eric suddenly remembered. At the same time, another figure appeared in his mind. It was the woman in the black shirt he had met at the London premiere of Casino Royale. A few years ago, when they had met at Harvard, Carolyn had shown him a photo of her aunt. Although the lighting in the corridor was rather dim at that time, after Carolyn's reminder, Eric was 100% sure that the woman in the photo was Carolyn's aunt. However, why would she appear at the premiere of Casino Royale? He remembered that Carolyn had said a few years ago that her aunt had mentioned him in a letter. Now that he thought about it, it was possible that she had specially rushed over to see her niece's boyfriend. This kind of thing was in line with some of the customs in his previous life. However, when he carefully recalled the woman's expression at that time, Eric had an indescribable feeling that things were not as simple as he had imagined. "Then, Carolyn, do you have your aunt's photo on you right now?" Carolyn did not understand why Eric had asked this, but she nodded. She took out a wallet from her handbag and flipped through it twice before showing it to Eric. "Here, I took this photo with my aunt on the Walk of Fame last week." Eric took the girl's wallet and sized up the woman in the photo who was intimately hugging Carolyn. Once again, a completely inexplicable feeling arose in his heart. After struggling for a while, he was still unable to pinpoint exactly what had gone wrong. Carolyn saw that Eric had been staring at the photo for a long time. She recalled that the t-shirt she had worn that day was a little too short, and seemed to have revealed a portion of her waist. Her face turned slightly red. She wanted to take the wallet back, but was too embarrassed to do so. She could only try to find something to say. But, Eric, I feel that your eyes are very similar to my aunt's. Carolyn's completely unintentional words were like a bolt of lightning that cleaved through Eric's chaotic thoughts. He only felt his hand loosen, and the girl's exquisite pink wallet fell to the ground. If a woman was only looking for a boyfriend for her niece, she would definitely not reveal such an apologetic expression. However, if he followed a certain line of thought, many details seemed to make sense. Furthermore, Eric finally understood that the strange feeling he had in his heart was called déjà vu. After the wallet fell, Eric instantly recovered from his shock. He hurriedly apologized to the girl, and instructed a waiter on the lower deck to throw the wallet up. He caught it and handed it to the girl. "I'm really sorry. I accidentally dropped it." "It's fine." Carolyn shook her head and placed the wallet back into her bag. Raising her head, she saw that Eric was sizing her up again. She gave a shy smile and said, "Eric, what's the matter?" "Oh, it's nothing," Eric said as he stretched out his hand and pinched Carolyn's shoulder. "There's a strand of hair here. Yeah." Carolyn was just about to nod her head when she felt something tighten on her head. She tilted her head along with Eric's strength. Seeing Eric casually retract his hand and casually reach it into his trouser pocket, the girl wrinkled her little nose in dissatisfaction. "Eric, you're really bad." Eric looked at the girl's angry yet cute expression. After hesitating for a while, he gestured to Melanie, who was standing not far away. After waiting for her to come over, he said, "How about this, Melanie? In the future, you and Carolyn can follow me by my side." Carolyn and Melanie immediately looked at each other in dismay. In fact, Melanie already had such thoughts. However, she was also clear that she could not stay by Carolyn's side forever. Furthermore, if Eric needed two assistants at the same time, in terms of ability and experience, it would probably not be her turn. Eric did not explain further. Seeing that the two girls did not object, he said, "Then it's settled. I'll ask Kelly to arrange it for you next week. Go and have fun first. I still have some things to do." After the two girls left, Eric leaned against the railing and silently finished a glass of red wine. He left the top deck and found Katzenberg, who was discussing the early preparations for Spider-Man with Cameron. The two of them went to an office in the cabin together. Eric handed Katzenberg a paper bag that was simply folded with a napkin and said, "Jeffrey, do me a favor. Also, the fewer people who know about this, the better." Katzenberg saw Eric's serious expression and nodded solemnly. He took the paper bag, but there was a puzzled look in his eyes. Eric took the initiative to explain. "There are 2 strands of hair inside. I need you to find someone to do a relationship test." Katzenberg obviously did not understand the term Eric was talking about. Relationship test? It's a DNA test. Get someone to check if the owners of these 2 strands of hair are cousins. Katzenberg immediately understood when Eric said this. Although he was more and more curious, Katzenberg also knew that Eric had given him this kind of private matter out of trust. Thus, he resisted the urge to get to the bottom of it. He took out his wallet and carefully put away the paper bag. He nodded and said, "Don't worry, Eric. I'll get someone to do it right away. I'll give you the results on Monday." Chapter 906. Both Eric and Katzenberg hoped that the expansion of the Firefly theme park project could be carried out quietly. However, many things were destined to be difficult to achieve. On the second day of the opening of the Titanic theme exhibition hall, there was a lot of news in the media that Firefly Group was going to build a theme park on the basis of Prevista Studios. There was even a very professional analysis of the most likely expansion plan of Firefly Studios to the east. Later, the staff who had been secretly in contact with the residents on the east side of Firefly Studios for some time reported that the residents who had almost agreed to sell the real estate all backed out. Although most of them were willing to continue the negotiations, without exception, they all raised the price to an unacceptable price. Some residents even offered a sky-high price of $1 million for a property worth less than $100,000. In this situation, it was obvious that someone was behind it. As for who it was even easier to guess. On the other hand, the plan to buy the 160 hectares of land west of Lincoln Avenue was unusually smooth. As soon as Firefly Group proposed it, the Pre-Vista District government agreed. The price was only 50% higher than when Firefly bought the studio. It was not hard to imagine that Pre-Vista could not wait for Firefly Group to build a theme park in its own city. After all, if a large-scale theme park thrived, not only could it pay hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes for the local area every year, but it could also create a lot of jobs. In the United States, taxes and jobs were basically the indicators to judge the political performance of the various levels of governance. From the federal president to the mayor of a small town, if they wanted to win the support of the voters, they could not escape from these two indicators. Due to the disruption, the expansion plan to the east was not feasible in the short term. The management could only try their best to let the theme park design team plan the land west of Lincoln Avenue and try to come up with a more feasible plan. On Saturday night, Eric secretly handed his and Carolyn's hair to Katzenberg. Katzenberg had promised to give the results to Eric on Monday. However, the next day, Katzenberg called apologetically and said that the cousin DNA test requested by Eric was more difficult. It might take 3 days to get an accurate result. This continued until Wednesday of the second week. Early in the morning, Katzenberg came to Eric's office in Firefly Studios with a thick stack of appraisal reports. In order to keep it a secret, I specially asked someone to send it to San Francisco for a test. Katzenberg took out the test report from the document bag and placed it in front of Eric. He continued, "The report was just sent this morning." On the phone, the doctor in charge of the test told me that they compared all 46 chromosomes in the 2 samples one by one and selected 9 chromosomes that matched preliminarily for further testing. Among the 50 DNA loci of the 9 chromosomes, only 1 locus was different, and the match was 98%. Then, they took another 50 DNA loci for testing, and this time, all of them matched. Katzenberg's meaning was obvious. Seeing that Eric was already focused on reading the report, she didn't say anything else. She greeted him softly and left his office quietly. The entire appraisal report was more than 20 pages long, and the content was far more detailed than what Katzenberg had said. There were also many more professional comparison photos. Eric quietly flipped through the report. When he saw the positive conclusion on the last page, he was silent for a while. He got up and walked to the shredder. He stuffed the report in his hand and the craft paper bag into the shredder. To be fair, Eric had no interest in the past of this body. If it weren't for Carolyn, even if he had noticed something, he wouldn't have taken the initiative to verify it. After sorting out some of the details in his mind, Eric realized that perhaps the woman didn't have any intention of acknowledging him. This was actually for the best. As he was staring at a pile of paper in a daze, the office door was knocked twice. Eric responded and turned around. Carolyn walked in with a stack of documents. She noticed that Eric was standing next to the shredder and looking at her with a strange expression on his face. She was puzzled and asked, "Eric, what's wrong?" "Nothing." Eric shook his head and made a habitual joke. "I'm not used to it. I almost thought that a primary school student had invaded my office." Carolyn wrinkled her nose in dissatisfaction, but the corners of her mouth were slightly raised. She ignored Eric's teasing and placed a few folders on Eric's desk. She said, "These are all for you to sign today." In addition, Ms. Pascal called. "The negotiations between MGM and Rainbow Media have come to a conclusion. She wants to make an appointment to talk to you. Call her now and ask her to come over." Eric sat down behind his desk and said, "Also, I forgot to say yesterday. Book a table at the restaurant on the ship at noon. I want to treat someone to a meal." "Okay." Carolyn nodded. After confirming that Eric didn't have any other instructions, she turned and left the office. Listening to the sound of the door closing, Eric took out a pen from the pen holder and held it in his hand. He then opened the first document. This was the next phase of the Clover Fund's purchase plan. At the end of July, the currency and financial market in Thailand was already in chaos. After the international currency speculators sucked the marrow out of Thailand, they had already turned their attention to the second piece of meat in Southeast Asia, the Indonesian rupiah. Due to the large-scale outbreak of the financial crisis in Southeast Asia, the Nasdaq index in North America had also fluctuated quite frequently in the past month. The originally rapid upward trend had temporarily slowed down. Although there were more pessimistic comments about the Nasdaq market, Eric understood that this was the last opportunity for the Clover Fund to buy IT stocks at a lower price. Therefore, in the next 3 months, Eric asked people to draft a stock investment plan of up to $1.5 billion. This also led to the original $2 billion stock investment plan for this year to eventually increase to $3 billion or even more. However, in recent years, the overall performance of the Firefly Group had increased. Coupled with the unexpectedly large profits brought to Firefly by popular movies such as Titanic and Finding Nemo. Although this plan was criticized by the other shareholders and executives of the group, there was not much opposition. Eric carefully read the purchase plan. Looking at the list of popular high-tech companies, he suddenly remembered Larry Ellison, who he hadn't heard from for a long time. He didn't know how Larry Ellison's plan to acquire Apple was going. Eric picked up his phone and called him. Although Larry Ellison's tone was friendly, when it came to the acquisition of Apple, Eric noticed that Larry Ellison was a bit evasive. After hanging up the phone, Eric thought for a while and shook his head with a smile. He picked up the phone on the table and dialed Carolyn's number. However, Melanie picked up the phone. He didn't mind and ordered, "Get someone to check on the progress of Larry Ellison's acquisition of Apple." Chapter 907. Rainbow Media's assets mainly include the wholly owned Bravo channel, the New York Sports channel with a 70% stake, the Orlando WRBW channel with a 50% stake, the Fuse Music channel with a 45% stake, and the Playboy channel with a 30% stake. Through asset evaluation, the total market value of this company is about $1.8 billion. Basic Cable Company insists on selling up to 30% of its shares to MGM at a price of $600 million. At the same time, we will also get the operating rights of the Bravo channel. In the office, Amy Pascal, who came from Century City, reported to Eric the final results of the negotiations with Basic Cable Company. Eric looked at the preliminary proposed transaction plan in his hand and felt as if something strange had sneaked in. He looked up and asked Amy with a smile, "Playboy channel?" Amy resisted the urge to roll her eyes at Eric and explained, "This is a paid cable channel created by Basic Cable Company in 1986 in cooperation with the Playboy Group. It mainly provides adult programs such as erotic movies." "Oh, okay," Eric nodded and did not continue the topic that could easily embarrass a woman. He said, "That's it then. However, forget about the other TV stations. After the transaction is completed, you should persuade the management of Rainbow Media to sell the shares of the Playboy channel as soon as possible." Amy hesitated and said, "Eric, the profitability of the Playboy channel is still very good. Moreover, Rainbow Media only holds shares. The operating rights of the TV stations have always been with the Playboy Group. It won't have any impact on us." "You may be mistaken, Amy. I'm not asking you to sell the shares of the Playboy channel for the sake of the company's reputation. Now that there are more and more adult content for free on the internet, the physical erotic industry will definitely decline in the next few years. If we don't sell it now, this asset will definitely shrink significantly in the future." "Well, I'll remember this," Amy nodded and continued. "There's also the issue of bonds. We have reached an agreement with Morgan Stanley. They will assist MGM to issue $500 million of corporate bonds next month. At present, many foundations, including State Street Worldwide, have expressed their intention to subscribe. Our financing scale is not large, so it will definitely go smoothly." Although she said this, Amy looked at Eric with more complicated emotions in her eyes. MGM's initial plan was to raise $1 billion in bonds. However, because Eric took away the production rights of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the global sales of Casino Royale brought a lot of cash flow to MGM. In the end, the company only needed to issue half of the bonds for the expansion of the television business. Although the outside world was generally optimistic about MGM's stable expansion strategy and most media praised MGM's decision to give up the high-risk The Lord of the Rings trilogy, AI.me vaguely felt that losing the rights to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, as well as the film and television rights to Thor King's other two works, The Hobbit and The Silmarillion, would definitely be a heavy loss for MGM. AI.me was even certain that Eric did this as a punishment for the wavering attitude of MGM shareholders and management during the Pierce Brosnan incident. However, it wasn't until the first movie of the Lord of the Rings series was released that she understood the severity of the punishment. Eric more or less felt the change in AI.me's eyes, but he was too lazy to think about it. He closed the transaction plan in his hand and continued, "Since you've taken down 2 television stations at once, have you thought about a detailed business strategy?" "Yes," AI.me replied. Entertainment and Bravo's original market positioning overlap. My plan is to clearly differentiate the content positioning of the 2 television stations. Entertainment focuses on entertainment and fashion programs. The audience is determined to be around 18 years old, so the content needs to be more avant-garde. In this regard, I think the idea of the Beverly Girls reality show is very good. In addition, the management has already started to prepare an entertainment news channel that specializes in broadcasting entertainment and fashion news. We also plan to continue with this plan. As for Bravo, we plan to focus on the housewife audience. In this regard, Bravo has already laid a good foundation. What we need to do is to continue to develop suitable television programs and consolidate Bravo's market position in this audience. Housewife. Eric repeated the word AI.me just said. The name of a TV series almost instantly appeared in his mind, Desperate Housewives. For a TV station that catered to housewives, Desperate Housewives was practically tailor-made. The reason why ABC TV station became more and more known as a women's station was mainly due to the high ratings of Desperate Housewives. Now, Firefly Group already had Lifetime TV, which was aimed at elite urban women. Now, they had Bravo TV, which was aimed at housewives. Eric would definitely not allow ABC to develop in the direction of a women's channel. If that was the case, it would be perfect to place the killer weapon, Desperate Housewives, in Bravo. AI.me didn't hear the word Eric said clearly, so she asked in confusion, "Eric, what did you just say?" Eric came back to his senses and shook his head. He didn't plan to say this idea for the time being. "I just came up with some ideas and it's not mature yet. I'll tell you guys in a few days. You should focus on taking over the integration of the 2 TV stations." In the past, he only watched a few episodes of Desperate Housewives intermittently. It was unrealistic to want to replicate the entire story. The only thing he could do was to rewrite the script based on the general idea of the TV series. However, if he did that, it would be difficult to predict whether it would be popular with the audience. However, this was actually good. After all, if the original version of Desperate Housewives was broadcast on Bravo, which was far inferior to ABC, it would be a pity. Now, it was equivalent to making a new TV series. It didn't matter if it succeeded or failed. AI.me nodded. She was about to leave when she remembered something and said, "By the way, Eric, about Beverly Girls, Ms. Zana has already chosen 4 girls and the script is almost finished. Do you want to take a look at it?" Eric opened his schedule on the computer monitor and looked at it. He nodded and said, "If I'm free in the next few days, I'll get someone to call her." After sending AI.me off, Eric made an appointment with Peter Jackson at noon to have lunch at the restaurant on the Titanic. Peter Jackson had been preparing for the Lord of the Rings series for so many years and was finally about to enter the official production stage. He didn't expect to suddenly encounter a change in the producer. Recently, he had been very nervous and was afraid that the project would mysteriously fail again. Eric naturally wouldn't allow this to happen. For this reason, he personally came out to appease Peter. Other than the upcoming Final Destination 2, Firefly Group had no other films to release during the summer. Eric's energy began to turn to other projects in the company. Iron Man was scheduled to start filming early next year and casting had recently begun. Although the preparation for Spider-Man was very slow, casting had also begun. Although there were no less than 10 films in various stages of production under the Firefly Group, Eric originally only needed to pay attention to the 2 groundbreaking works in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, since the Lord of the Rings trilogy was brought over, Eric had to allocate a lot of energy to this project. The Lord of the Rings trilogy used less than $300 million to pry a huge box office of $3 billion worldwide. The return was even higher than Titanic, so Eric naturally needed to treat it with caution. In order to make the whole project run more smoothly, while transferring the production rights to Firefly, Eric also poached the production team that had been initially established at MGM to continue to cooperate with Peter Jackson in the preparation of the movie. The biggest difficulty in the early stages of the Lord of the Rings trilogy was actually the casting. Due to the grand story background, there were also a lot of characters in the trilogy, which meant that the plan to invite well-known actors to participate was basically impossible. Although Eric was very optimistic about this project, he did not take the initiative to increase the budget for it. Therefore, most of the roles in the movie would be second- or third-tier newcomers. Although there was no shortage of actors in Hollywood, it was not so easy to pick out the right candidate in the vast sea of people. Apart from asking for the roles of the Elven Queen and Princess Arwen, which he planned to give to Nicole and Diane Kruger, Eric did not intend to interfere too much with the casting. He only set a budget limit for Peter Jackson's salary and left the tedious matters to him. The casting of the Lord of the Rings trilogy was easy to handle. The advantage of having many roles meant that even if 1 or 2 failed in the casting, it would not affect the quality of the entire movie. After his 16th birthday, Stuart Runkle also agreed to sign a 6-film contract with Marvel, leaving only Iron Man. After rejecting Tom Cruise, Marvel Entertainment CEO Avi Allard took a fancy to Matthew McConaughey. This male star's bohemian temperament was indeed in line with the image of Iron Man. However, after consecutively starring in 7 Deadly Sins and Chrono Trigger, Matthew McConaughey had been promoted to a Hollywood A-lister and was not willing to sign a long-term contract with Marvel. Eric still inexplicably did not like this male star, so he did not continue to talk to him. Therefore, as a major production with a production cost of more than $100 million, the casting of the male lead, which was usually limited to a very small circle, eventually became an audition for all Hollywood actors. Although Firefly's harsh long-term contract conditions were inevitably ridiculed by some media and even evolved into a pessimistic view of the prospects of the entire project, as Eric said during the Brosnan incident, the line of people who wanted to get this role could still be lined up from Malibu to Burbank. Firefly Studios. It was the last day of July, and today happened to be Friday. Kris Jenner drove into Firefly Studios and parked the car in the parking lot, but she was not in a hurry to get out of the car. She took out a makeup mirror and carefully touched her makeup before opening the door. She got the news last Wednesday that Eric would take time to read the script of Beverly Girls. She did not expect to hear the news more than a week later. However, she did not dare to have any complaints in her heart. Recently, due to the box office explosion of Casino Royale, followed by the replacement of Brosnan, Eric's personal influence in Hollywood had further risen to an unattainable level. For such a big shot, Kris Jenner, who was instinctively in awe of power, felt that even if she had to wait for a month, it did not seem to be a big deal. As long as she could maintain a relationship with him, it was enough to let her hold her head high in her small circle. During this period of time, her life was indeed very glorious. For the Beverly Girls project, she moved back to Los Angeles with her family. She originally thought that some of her old friends would be estranged because she had been away for a few years, but when they learned that she would be supervising the reality show that Eric Williams had personally conceived, those people all rushed over one by one, much more enthusiastic than when she had been in Los Angeles. She went all the way to Eric's office door and politely greeted the outer secretary. The other party asked her to wait for a while, so Kris Jenner sat in the outer reception room. "Don't blame me for not reminding you one last time, Bridget. Once you get this role, everyone may have to call you Little Pepper when they see you in the future." After a while, Eric's office door opened, and a man and a woman walked out. The man was naturally Eric, and the woman was Bridget Fonda, who was once the heroine of Ghost. Kris Jenner remembered that since Ghost, the other party did not seem to have any outstanding works in recent years. However, faintly listening to Eric's tone, she seemed to be getting an important role again. Moreover, it was an important role that could change an actor's impression in the hearts of the audience. She could not help but feel a little envious. She had also fantasized about becoming an actress, but unfortunately, she never had such an opportunity. Bridget Fonda also noticed Kris Jenner sitting in the reception room. She nodded at her and said a few words to Eric before leaving. Eric watched Bridget Fonda leave, then waved at Kris Jenner. "Sorry, Miss Jenner, I've kept you waiting. Please come with me." "It's okay." "Actually, I just arrived too," Kris Jenner quickly echoed, picked up her bag and walked over. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.